Broadcasting from deep within the heartland of free America, where liberty still shines bright. You're listening to On the Move with Mack Worley III.
Hello, Mac Pack. It's great to be back with you for another episode of our program. This is On the Move with Mack Worley. I, of course, am your host, Mack Worley III. We've got a lot on the agenda today, so I hope you guys are ready to participate and listen, and whatever reason you're coming to this show, I hope that you're ready for what's in store. Let me go through the featured topics first and foremost. Today's episode is titled, Hillary Will Not Be Prosecuted. This is episode 143 of our program. And the featured topics in the first hour, we're going to have an interview in about 15 minutes with James Allsup, I believe that's how you say his last name, about his YouTube videos of Trump protests. He went up to campus, and this is in Washington State, I believe. He's basically filming his interactions with some of these lefties who are protesting Donald Trump. And the main reason why I'm bringing him on here is because I'm just extremely interested to hear what he saw and, you know, the kind of conversations that he had. He has those videos posted on his YouTube channel. I will share that in a moment. Once he joins, I'll tell you where to go check those out. In the second hour, we're going to be joined by Dick Lapre. I'm really excited to talk to him because he's going to explain something that I've been learning about the last 2 weeks here, and it is a very complicated subject. But it's one that I think it is extremely important that we learn about. They're called collateralized debt obligations, CDOs. So Dick Lapre, he's a senior loan advisor for RPM Mortgage of Alamo, California. And he's been doing mortgages since 1991 and writing a weekly newspaper or newsletter about mortgages and the economy in general since 1995. He's got a lot of knowledge. I'm really excited to pick his brain. I want to talk to him about why these CDOs, the collateralized debt obligations, why they are partly responsible for the 2008 financial crisis. And I also just want to pick his brain more about these things and how they work. And it's very complicated. It's kind of a shell game. It's also not very transparent either. So we're going to talk about that. Some other featured topics here. I want to play a clip from learnliberty.org. I wasn't able to get to this last week, but I think it is very important. I think it has a lot of great insights into Donald Trump. The clip is titled Making Sense of Trumpism. So I'm going to play it, give you some commentary, and you guys are welcome to comment back. Let me know what you think. Also, the next feature topic, this is the main topic of today's show. Trump is backing off his pledge to further investigate Hillary Clinton and the email server scandal. So we're going to be diving into that. I've got an article I'm going to read from that and give you some of my thoughts on it. I'd love to hear from you as well. Then I have a YouTube video about a Central Texan who challenged the right to film and stop and ID law. So we've got a whole video. This is quite interesting situation. Again, I am all about challenging unconstitutional enforcement of fictional laws. From police officers who are just making stuff up as they go, enforcing laws based on their feelings instead of what is written in the books. Anyway, then I also want to get into some insights that I've been thinking about this week and really for quite a while. Just insights into human nature. I'm going to talk about identity politics, but also I kind of want to go back into the history of government and why we formed government in the first place, and why America is the exception to what we see everywhere else out in the world. We see essentially despots and tyrants all over the place, and every now and then we'll see a few democracies here and there, but even still, most of them don't have the essential human rights respected like we do enshrined in our Constitution. Not necessarily that we're seeing today in real life, but anyway, I digress. Then lastly, if we have time, I want to get into identity politics and nationalism and why they're both essentially hand in hand, and why we could honestly give a lot of the blame for the rise of nationalism in Europe and here in America to this leftist game of identity politics. So we're going to get into that. We've got a lot more on the agenda. You guys don't want to go anywhere. And by the way, if you would like to join today's conversation, I would love that. Please feel free to give us a call. The MacPack phone lines are open. The telephone number of the show is 360-450-5625. Again, that's 360-450-5625. You can also get us on Twitter at OnTheMoveShow. You can message us on Facebook.com/OnTheMoveShow. I'll read your message live on the air if deemed worthy. So anyway, at this point, we're going to go ahead and cut to our first commercial break. When we come back, we're going to start up with this Making Sense of Trumpism video that we didn't get a chance to get to last week. So we'll be right back after this break, folks. Don't go anywhere.
Have you visited the On the Move with Mack Worley store? We've got amazing original design t-shirts, hoodies, cell phone cases, and coffee mugs for sale at OnTheMoveShow.com. Just click the shop link on our homepage. You won't want to miss out on the iHeart Open Carry and Bear Arms t-shirts for only $20 plus shipping. Again, just go to OnTheMoveShow.com and click the shop link on our homepage. Your purchases will help make the On the Move show bigger and better. We appreciate your support. Are you an activist who needs affordable flyers or brochures for passing out literature? Or a political candidate who's looking for business cards, logo designs, yard signs, or vehicle decals? Email me, Latasha Worley, for all your graphic design needs at latashaworley@gmail.com. That's LATOSHA Worley@gmail.com. And don't forget to mention On the Move to get a 10% discount on all graphic design services.
Oath Keepers is a nonpartisan association of current active duty military, reserve, guard, veterans, peace officers, and firefighters who will fulfill the oath we swore, with the support of like-minded citizens who take an oath to stand with us, to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. So help us God. Join us at oathkeepers.org.
Broadcasting from deep within the heartland of free America, where liberty still shines bright. You're listening to On the Move with Mack Worley III.
And we're back. So I want to start right off the bat with this Making Sense of Trumpism video from Learn Liberty. I think it has a lot of insights into the Donald Trump movement. And I'll give you my commentary throughout and after. So we'll be right back after this clip here.
So what is happening globally that has caused that this isn't just I think everyone in America thinks everything's about us all the time, and this is just our phenomenon, and it's nothing to do with anything else.
Well, absolutely. There's something really strange going on here in the United States, I think it's fair to say. Although maybe not that strange, because I actually think that what's happening with Donald Trump is part of a more widespread phenomenon in most Western democracies, which is the rise of a kind of politics that's commonly described, I think, misleadingly, as right-wing populism. And what it actually is a politics that combines left-of-centre economics, strong support for the welfare state, with an extremely unpleasant kind of nativism, anti-globalism, nationalism.
Okay, so let me just point out, the left-of-center economic policy is absolutely true. I think this is pretty interesting insight that Professor Steve Davies is talking about. He is left-of-center. Donald Trump is not a conservative. I've been saying this for quite a while. And, he is still protecting and claims that he's going to protect anyway. It remains to be seen what will actually happen. But I tend to believe him. Donald Trump has been a progressive in his past. And I argue that he is still currently, but some people disagree with me, and apparently a lot of people have no problem with that, and that's cool. That's fine. But his claims that he's going to protect things like welfare and Social Security and stuff, he doesn't want to cut those. At least that's what he says. Again, these are left-of-center policies. His idea that universal health care is good. He said that the government's going to pay for everyone's health care underneath him, and everything's going to be great. Again, that universal health care, the socialized medicine, is left of center. So this is correct. And then it does combine this interesting dichotomy that we have seen before throughout history. And FYI, I am not comparing Trump to Hitler, just to give you a heads up. But the philosophy of the nationalist style with the socialist policies, that was what the Nazi Party was about. It was the Nationalist Socialist Party. And I'm not saying that Donald Trump is Hitler, because only Hitler was Hitler, okay? What I'm saying is that it's an interesting phenomenon that's happening right now, and it's something that maybe you should pay attention to. But again, I don't think that Donald Trump is going to be half as bad for the left as what they are concerned about. They're worried about him rounding people up and putting them in camps and things like that. I don't think it's going to be like that. Maybe it will, and if it does, obviously I will oppose him on those issues. I don't think he's going to do a lot of things that the right wants to do. I think he's going to probably be a moderate. Do lefty things on some issues and things that the right will agree on others. And I don't know how that is going to have an effect on his supporters, which is one of the reasons why I'm interested to have James Allsup come on the show. I'm just really genuinely interested in what he has to say about some of the things that people are calling flip-flops, like his decision on the wall. He said that he's, there's going to be some areas where it's not necessarily going to be a wall, and I contend that 10% of that wall will not be built, but that's my contention. But Donald Trump said that some of these places he's not necessarily going to build a wall. It's going to be a fence, and maybe there'll be some use of technology and use of land features to stop people from crossing the border. But anyway, this video continues.
And that's pretty much where Donald Trump is coming from. It's straightforward Hamiltonian economic nationalism combined with a very unpleasant kind of identity politics, I would say.
Yeah.
But he's not alone. He's part of a much bigger phenomenon.
Okay, so let's unpack a couple of those phrases there. Mm-hmm. So you'd say this isn't a right-wing phenomenon because his politics are kind of left, right? And but he is using nationalism, so
yes.
that is more of the right side.
Yeah.
What were the other parts that were?
Well, there's also support for the welfare state, but on a strictly national basis. I mean, the correct name for this kind of politics, I think, is nationalist collectivism. You could call it National Socialism, but that kind of been claimed already.
That might be a little too scary.
Be too scary, yeah. It's nationalist collectivism, basically. And it's on the rise across most Western democracies. A few exceptions like Spain, Portugal, Ireland. But otherwise, this is the kind of politics that we see on the rise everywhere, I'm afraid. Marine Le Pen in France, Geert Wilders in the Netherlands, Donald Trump here. Pretty much everywhere. Canada's another exception.
So what is happening globally that has caused that this isn't just I think everyone in America thinks everything's about us all the time, and this is just our phenomenon, and it's nothing to do with anything else. But what's happening globally?
Well, there are two things, I think. One of them is that a lot of the support for this kind of politics comes from older, working-class voters in what you would call the Rust Belt, decayed, ex-industrial areas where life has not been good for quite a long time. And these people feel that they're ignored by the political establishment, that the system is not working in their interests, and they're kicking back.
Yeah.
That's one reason.
And some of that, you would argue, is legit, right?
Yeah, it's legitimate. Yeah, indeed. They're quite right. Life has been.
Absolutely. Life has been difficult for people living in the Rust Belt. A lot of the manufacturing jobs have gone away, and it doesn't seem like they're going to be coming back. And a lot of this is happening, and has been happening since, 2000, 2008 as well, during the financial crisis. Life for these people has been getting continually worse and worse and worse, and it's no wonder that they've turned to a kind of economic nationalism. And I believe this is almost a kind of self-preservation. A lot of these people are acting in that way. They don't necessarily care about the politics, but they do want their jobs back.
It's been pretty hard for them for quite a long time.
Yeah.
The other thing, though, which I actually think is more important, is it's to do with the politics of identity. It's to do with a feeling that a certain kind of identity is under threat from the process of globalization, cosmopolitanism, maybe political correctness, a whole bunch of stuff like that. So there's a very powerful cultural reaction, a reassertion of a certain kind of identity. And I think that is what is really potent and really driving this kind of politics.
So how...
That was an excellent point. We're going to get into identity politics and nationalism and how they kind of go hand in hand. One is a natural reaction to the other. Nationalism is a natural reaction to identity politics, and identity politics is actually a natural reaction to nationalism. So we're going to talk about that a little bit more later in the show.
How much of that is just a reaction to some of the stuff happening on the left? That's, I come from the left, so that's the part that I've been focusing on, and I do see a certain element of the rise of Trump and the political correctness stuff and, the social justice warrior stuff. I see it as a natural reaction to what has happened on the left. Or maybe in Europe it's more because of immigration, that, these people, Marie Le Pen, for example, et cetera.
I think there is an element of truth in both of those things, actually. Undoubtedly, the push-button issue, as we saw in the Brexit referendum in the UK, for example, and with Marine Le Pen, is immigration, particularly immigration from the Middle East, but also from other parts of the world as well. But that, in a way, is not so much because of immigration per se, it's because of the way in which large-scale movement of people is seen to be transforming and changing the nature of a settled and established national community. And now, I think that in terms, particularly of the United States, yes, there is quite a lot of pushback against the kind of social justice warrior, as you alluded to, PC politics on the left. And in particular, the politics of identity. If you're going to push a politics of identity where apparently the only group who aren't allowed to have an identity are white working class men, sooner or later, those kind of people are going to say, well, hold on a minute, I have this identity too, which you are not respecting to your own terms. So there's a lot of pushback coming on. And I think that shows how really the response that liberals need to have, and I would include many people on the left in that category, should be one where you assert the importance of individualism and of identity as being something that, to a great degree, is personally chosen and formed, rather than being something that's given to you and fixed in some way.
Wow. Okay, so I really enjoyed that. I hope you guys got a lot out of it, and I think there is a lot to be said about that, especially in the fact that they were talking about how identity politics plays into nationalism, and how when people feel like their identity is being taken away from them, or that, for example, if you're a white male, you may feel like you're the only group of people that is not allowed to have your own identity, and therefore nationalism is a natural response as a result. And that is what we've seen. We have seen it in this election, and we're seeing it across the globe, honestly. There's all of these different nationalist movements that are rising up. So at this point, I'm actually really excited. We're going to be bringing on James Allsup. He's joining us on the program. James, are you there? You on the line?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, you're coming in loud and clear. Thanks.
I'll turn my mic down. Sorry.
Oh, no, you're good. So let me just ask you, first and foremost, in case my audience doesn't know who you are, can you give just a little bit of background about who you are and what you do? And also, before you get into that, make sure you blast out your social media. I know you got the YouTube channel. Share out all the stuff that you're doing out there.
Right. Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on. First of all, my name's James Allsup. I'm the host former host of a podcast called Campus Report, which was run through the Liberty Conservative. I'm the associate editor at the Liberty Conservative, which is a kind of a libertarian like version of National Review, kind of, you could say. We're a news and a blog site over at thelibertyconservative.com. And I am a student at Washington State University. I'm the president of Washington State University College Republicans, and I am also the state chair for Washington College Republicans here in Washington State. And yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Real James Allsup, like real Donald Trump, but Real James Allsup. That's Allsup with 2 L's. And I'm on YouTube as well, which is something that I wouldn't have said about a week and a half ago, because I had a YouTube channel with about 50 people following me.
Yeah.
But now it's exploded kind of up to about 5,000 people. So you follow me on YouTube as well. Just type in James Allsup and you'll find me.
Absolutely. And by the way, I've checked out your videos. I thought, first of all, my hat's off to you just for having the bravery there to go down to these anti-Donald Trump rallies. And what I saw was not racism from you. I didn't see you trying to shout people down. I saw you genuinely trying to engage with people and have civil discourse. And I'm just curious, your overall impression of that event and what you were trying to do. First of all, what were you actually trying to accomplish? And second of all, do you think you did it?
Yeah, so it's interesting. The video that has gone the most viral, it's at about 300,000 views right now, is a video called Students Triggered by Trump's Victory. And that video, actually, people had the idea in the comments that we were out there trying to agitate people, or we were trying to, crash a protest. That's actually not what happened. We were out there with college Republicans hosting a recruitment event. This was the day or 2 days after the election, so November 9th or 10th. We were out there, we had like a Trump flag, and we were wearing our Trump shirts, and we were clipboarding, essentially, for college Republicans. And we started at like 11 a.m. And then as the day went on, by noon, there was a full-fledged, full-throated counter-protest out there to try to, I don't know what their objective was, just to, generally voice disagreement and upset with how the election went. I don't know really what they were trying to do, but we realized, hey, there's a lot of people out here who are really angry. Let's go talk to them. Let's actually try to have a real discussion instead of just, they were playing FDT in the background and stuff, and we saw that and thought, okay, that's not really an argument. It's not productive.
Can you explain what FDT is for those people out there?
Am I uncensored?
Go ahead and keep it PG-13.
Okay, it's essentially F Donald Trump. It's a song that is by a rapper named YG, and it's become the go-to for people who are on college campuses or just generally protesting Donald Trump. You'll hear it, I guarantee, at any anti-Trump protest that you go to. So they were actually breaking the school's policy on no amplified sound, which is interesting because I guarantee if we had gone out there with a megaphone and started yelling about how much we love Trump, we would have been shut down instantly. But because they're protesting Trump, the university, of course, lets them go ahead with it. So, we grabbed a cell phone. Some guy got a cell phone out, and we made a little sign that said "Talk to a Trump supporter," and we just went around talking to people and asking them, like, what do you not like about Donald Trump, and what are your concerns about him as president? And we heard a lot of, oh, he's a fascist, and then when asked to explain, people would say, oh, well, I don't really know. We just heard a lot of things like that where people, I feel like, have bought into this media narrative that he's literally the worst person in the world, but they haven't done their research, and they haven't looked into what he actually stands for and what he wants to accomplish. And so they get really riled up and they're really upset, but they don't really know why. And that's a lot of what we encountered there, and again in downtown Seattle a couple days ago when we were there at the Black Lives Matter anti-Trump protest as well.
Okay, so let me backtrack a little bit here. You said it was a counter-protest, so I just want to confirm. Did this protest spring up as a result of you guys being out there, or did it just so happen to be there, and it just so happened to happen at the same time as you guys being there?
Yeah, that's my indication. I didn't know of any like anti-Trump events planned that day, so my assumption is that it just happened organically. Yeah.
I see. So, did you at any point feel threatened or anything like that? Did they circle around you and make you guys feel like unsafe at all or anything like that?
Well, they circled around us, but it was mostly. And this is the thing you notice. It's kind of weird. You notice mostly these people who are out there protesting Trump are like usually women, or they're like really, not to be a jerk, but kind of like effeminate men. And so I wasn't really threatened by that. I didn't feel like I was intimidated at that event anyways. The one in downtown Seattle, that was a different story because that was, and you're also on a college campus. And so you feel like if anybody does anything, there's police nearby. And in fact, there were undercover officers at that event. But the one in downtown Seattle was different because there were guys who were wearing, black masks, all black clothing. It was a dark, unlit environment. So yeah, there was a lot of feeling of uncertainty and potential that something could go wrong at the one in downtown Seattle.
Yeah. Well, I've been down to Portland when I lived in Washington State. I went down in Portland. I covered the May Day protest down there. I ran into a lot of the the same kind of figures, black masks, wearing that kind of stuff, and some of those guys down there are extremely violent. As my friend Michael Strickland, who I've met him. Yeah, you're familiar with the case. Okay, yeah. So Mike, for those of you out there who aren't in the know, Mike drew his gun because he was surrounded by protesters who were touching him, and he felt unsafe. He drew his gun. They backed up, and he had enough space to feel more comfortable, so he holstered his weapon, and he ended up getting arrested and is now currently fighting felony charges. But a lot of these black mask guys that I saw down in Portland, a lot of these are the anarchists, and they're really just pseudo-anarchists because they're not really anarchists. They're closer to communism. But I'm just curious, did you see any kind of anarchist paraphernalia, chants, or anything up there in Seattle?
Well, so what I learned is I originally thought these guys were communists because they had the flags, and there was a poster posted by Radcom, which is the Radical Communists, and they were standing right next to it. So I assumed okay, you know, these guys are probably communists. So I went up and you can see this in one of my videos. I asked them, hey, are you guys with the communists? And they just descend on me and they try to, you know, knock my camera out of my hand with their flagpoles and stuff.
Yep.
I later came to realize that they're with Antifa. They're anti-fascist the protesters, which really Antifa can be summed up as people who are, you know, just LARPing as political activists. They don't really know what they want. They just don't like the system and they're just frustrated. And yeah, so that's who they are generally. I've heard that Portland's Antifa crowd is much more serious and much more violent than Seattle's is. So
those guys, they don't play around. I will tell you, but they also, right. You know, I mean, they're only really a threat in large groups. They only get really bold when they have the large groups and they have a crowd momentum behind them. I have myself dealt with them several times. I've recorded them. They'll try to snatch your camera out of your hand. They don't like you showing their face or recording them or anything because they think that the government's going to sweep them up and throw them in some kind of camp or something. This is these are real concerns from these guys. And okay, yeah. You know, I'm not gonna you know bash them, I guess, but the violence and the destruction of private and public property, that is mainly caused from these fringe elements in these protests, like Antifa and these these pseudo anarchists. And again, these networks, especially down in Portland, just from my personal experience, they've networked with, you know, the socialists, the communists, the illegal immigrants, the unions, the pseudo anarchists, and basically just a broad swath of leftists who I would define as useful idiots, as Karl Marx coined the term. So a lot of these people don't really know what they're down there for, or don't really understand what's being advocated for. But if you listen to the folks up there who give speeches, because in May Day they'll do speeches and then they go march.
Right.
May Day I went down there, I recorded some of the Black Panthers talking, and they have said, and this is one of the reasons why I'm really a big fan of citizen journalists like yourself. You go down, you record them, showing what they really say and what they think, and they're arguing for the complete destruction of the capitalist system. So it's important that we expose them for what they say, and my hat's off to you for having the stones to go down there and do that yourself.
Well, yeah, thank you for that, and I totally agree. And one of the interesting things that we saw and that we recorded in one of their speeches in Seattle, the 20th, was a guy who was up there and he was talking about how much he didn't like the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA. And as a libertarian, I was totally there with him. I totally agree with that. But I had to wonder, where were you protesting when Obama was in office doing all of this stuff? You know, where were the protests when Obama was drone striking innocent civilians and taking out American nationals overseas with drone strikes? Where were you guys protesting that? They weren't there because a lot of them, like you said, are useful idiots. And another interesting aside is that down in Portland, for example, something like 60% of the protesters who were arrested during the anti-Trump protests were not even registered to vote in Oregon. They were people who had been either just weren't engaged enough to vote, or who had been bussed in from out of state to come in and protest, or they were illegals. But so there's a lot of people there who, like you said, they don't really know what they're protesting. But I think it's unfortunate because there are a lot of people who go down there with good intentions, who maybe are not that plugged in, but they're just upset and they just want to protest. But they get egged on by these people who are paid agitators. And I think that's something that really needs to be paid attention to and really needs to be brought to light, is that a lot of people are being used as pawns, essentially, by the people who profit from seeing civilization, come apart like that.
Yeah, they call and a lot of the dangerous stuff that I have noticed as well is from almost the herd mentality or mob mentality that you see from down there. People get emboldened, and then you'll see people who just want to watch the world burn start destroying public and private property just because. Right. You'll see the people who are opportunistic and they see this as an opportunity to loot a store or something like that. So you see that quite a bit, and I would argue that a lot of the destruction coming from down there is coming from the fringes, and I would say maybe that's 10 or 20% of the people who are out there are the hardcore ideological radicals, and the rest are somewhat varying degrees of involvement in politics and ideology. But again, once you get people in this herd mentality, you see people around who are destroying public and private property, and the anarchists, they'll be the first one to break a window. They have absolutely no problem with that. They know that first of all, they're wearing masks. No one's gonna know who they are, and if they're in a big enough group, they can get away with it, especially if other people are destroying stuff at the same time. So that really does egg a lot of these other people on. But I do think it's important because of how many, and again, this isn't I don't use this term to be disparaging when I say a useful idiot. I mean that in what Karl Marx said. It's just people who are being used and they're advocating for things that they may not necessarily even understand or even necessarily benefit them personally. It may actually go directly against their own self-interest and they don't know. So I think that one of the biggest things that we ought to be doing is going out to these kind of events and not only, first of all, recording them, showing people what they're doing, but also trying to engage with people, because I think we could reach people if we talk to them, and if we try to approach it from just a friendly conversation position instead of being confrontational. We listen to what they're saying, say, okay, I understand where you come from, and repeat what what their concerns were, and then start engaging with questions, not necessarily telling them that they're wrong, but start challenging their positions with more questions. Do you agree with that?
I absolutely agree with that, and that's something that I think is really often lost in a lot of people who go to these kind of events or try to have these conversations. Because I was down there and I was recording things, and a couple minutes after the encounter, and you can watch the video on YouTube, a couple minutes after the encounter with the first Black Flag Antifa guys, I turned my camera off and I was just there watching the initial speeches, and a high school kid who had heard the encounter came up and asked me, "Hey, why'd you vote for Trump?" And I explained it to him, and suddenly, there was a crowd, like 4 or 5 of their friends, and we had a conversation for about half an hour, camera off, not recording anything, talking about why I felt that a vote for Trump was the best possible outcome for me and for the country, and kind of helping to go through some of their concerns one by one. These kids, I think most of them were LGBT of some fashion, and they were really concerned about how Trump was going to treat the LGBT community. And so I was able to engage with them and say, hey, look, he's been the most pro-LGBT, pro-gay marriage Republican candidate probably in history, and definitely major party candidate that's ever been nominated. And so we were able to go through a lot of those things. And I feel like at the end of it, they had the experience, because these are kids from Seattle. They've not had the opportunity to talk to somebody who is a Trump supporter. They had the opportunity to talk to somebody in a calm and rational way about why they made that choice. And I think it helps to humanize the other side more, because it can be helpful for us too. When we go out and have these conversations, we can learn that it's not all just these radical far left people.
Exactly.
A lot of them, like you said, are just pretty normal people who have their concerns and have their own personal predispositions. And so, when you talk to them, it helps not only you become more understanding of what they want, but it also helps them. And I think recording is so beneficial, especially when you get people who, you don't want to be like in somebody's face, right? That's what they always say, oh, you're in my face. But I mean, if something is going on and there's something that you feel like is valuable to capture, go ahead and record it, because it cannot be understated enough how impactful one recording can be. For example, the people who recorded the "You're a white male," you've probably seen that. The kid at the Trump protest in Ohio or whatever, or I think it was St. Louis earlier this election cycle. People who record these kind of encounters, they can be broadcast. I think that video has something like 20 million views on YouTube. Even the videos that we shot at our school, which were just done impromptu with a cell phone and a piece of paper going around talking to people, we have upwards of 600,000 views on that stuff. And so don't underestimate the power that you can have just as a citizen journalist, to use the phrase, or as somebody who just goes out and has these conversations, because it can impact more than just the people in that direct encounter. The impact can spread more than you can ever imagine.
Absolutely. I'm looking at your YouTube channel right now, and you have 741,000 views. You've reached 741,000 people, or at least people have viewed your videos that many times. And one person can have a major impact. Don't ever let anyone tell you that one person cannot make a difference. You've reached people. Even when you went out and you were talking to people, you reached the people there. But then your impact had a much deeper reach, because you've now recorded it and put it online for people to see. And I do think that it does a lot of good. Like, for example, I've got a few million views on YouTube, and it's one of those things. This is why I started doing this, is to be able to convince people to stand up and do this stuff on their own. And I hope, out of the few million views I got, that people, I've reached people and maybe, inspired somebody to do the same thing that I do. Hopefully they do it better. But I want, I just want people to stand up and be their own leaders and stop looking for people to lead them by the hand and spoon feed them information and tell them where to stand and what to do and how to think. I want to convince people to think for themselves. So let me ask you. Let's start talking about thinking here. What did you learn while you were down there?
Well, I learned that I think a lot of the problems that we see in society can be cured by more information and by, to use a Marco Rubio quote, dispelling fictions, right? And that we have a major divide. I mean, I'm not gonna sugarcoat that. There's a major divide in this country, and that's especially visible in places like Seattle, where there are some people who can go their entire day without, or their entire lifetime even, without talking to somebody who is a conservative. Likewise, there's people in other states and other regions that can go their entire life without talking to somebody who is more of a liberal or more of a Democrat. And that's a problem, I think. I think that's a major problem because we, at the end of the day, we have the same interest, right? As soon as the election's over, we all have an interest in making sure that America does the best it can do and making sure that our country is the best it can be. And if we don't see the other side as having that same motivation, then it's really limiting. If we see the other side as just people who are evil or people who, don't care about America or just want to see America fail and collapse, don't get me wrong, there are some people like that. There are definitely some people who would love to see that. But the vast majority of people are within, they're within a certain framework where they have the country's best interest at heart. One of my best friends here at school is a Democrat. He's a guy who's run Democratic campaigns. We're really good friends, and we're able to see past politics a lot of the time and still get along. And that kind of relationship needs to happen with people. People need to have relationships with people who are on the other side of the political spectrum or apolitical or outside of politics, especially for people like us who are so within politics. It can kind of become an echo chamber, and we can start to only have friends who agree with us. And that's a problem for us too, because we become out of tune with what real people want, with what real Americans want. I mean, I grew up a little bit outside of Seattle, so I grew up around, predominantly people who were Democrats, predominantly people who would consider themselves liberal. And that's given me the opportunity to learn to get along with those people, but to also understand that they're just people like, just like me. And, most of my friends from back home are people who are Democrats for that reason. And I think that those are relationships that we really need to start having.
Agreed. Yeah, and that's something, especially after this election. I've been taking a lot of time to try to connect some dots with people from the other side of the aisle that we don't agree with on practically anything, but at least to engage in a friendly conversation. And for me, I've learned that the best way to talk with people who disagree with you on almost everything is to ask questions. I typically don't state my positions until after I've exhausted every position that they have, and you can challenge people with questions. You don't have to say you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. You can say, well, what do you think about this, and is that consistent with what you said before, and things along those lines. I tend to lead with most of my political conversations because I am a libertarian in philosophy as well. I lead with the non-aggression principle, and once you establish the fact that somebody thinks it's immoral to hurt other people and to take their stuff, you can pretty much challenge them and watch them decide for themselves that most of these big government programs are immoral, and it's pretty simple after that. You establish that somebody wants to be free, and that it's better to be free, and that it's moral to be free, and then you just ask and challenge with questions, and they'll change their mind themselves. What have you learned as far as for challenging people and trying to still be engaged in civil discourse without getting people mad or getting them to tune out on you or just to stop listening to spite you?
Yeah, I think you have to understand why people think what they do. And you can ask somebody, okay, what is your policy prescription for this problem? And then they give you their answer, and then you ask, okay, well, why do you think that's the best idea? And that's often a thing that people don't have, that internal reflection or internal conversation with themselves, because they're never prompted to, right? They think something because it's either what they hear or because it's just what they automatically assume would be the best idea, but they don't really dig deeper into what they think and what they're advocating for. and really figure out why they support that idea. And so, one of the conversations that we have the most as people on a college campus is the idea of free college. Well, you can ask people, well, why do you think that free college is a good idea? And they say, well, it's really good if we have more people go to college. It's really good if we, get people who are educated. And then you start prompting them and saying, well, shouldn't there be some buy-in for people if they want to go to college? Shouldn't there be some incentive to do well, which is the money you're spending to go to college? And you start bringing up all of these things that they may have not thought of before and they may have not considered before. And a lot of times at the end of it, they could say, well, a lot of people are just too proud to admit they've had their mind changed, but they could say, yeah, I'll think more about that, or yeah, maybe you are right about that. And that's great, because you get people to actually think about why they advocate for one idea, and oftentimes that'll start the ball rolling, and they'll start thinking about why they advocate for the rest of their political ideas. Absolutely. And they'll start thinking why they think the way they do, with more than just the topic that you talked about with them. And so that's really valuable, and that's something that needs to be done if we really want to change people's minds, because changing somebody's mind on one idea isn't enough, right? If you want to really make a difference, you have to be able to change the way people think, or at least get people to think about why they think the way they do. And I think the NAP is a great way to do that, leading with that premise. But then also, just one of the things I've used to talk to people is the idea that you know better what you want to do with your life. And because young people, sorry to ramble here, but young people tend to like control, and they tend to like feeling like they're in charge of their own life and feeling like they have the internal motivation and ability to shape their life the way they want it to be. And so once you present things to people in that regard, I think you can win a lot of young people over. For example, if you're talking about healthcare, you could say, well, shouldn't we have the right to decide whether or not we want to buy healthcare or not? Shouldn't we have the right to decide how we want to spend our money? Most young people, if presented with the argument in that way, they'll tend to agree with you.
Exactly. Yeah, and I've had conversations with lefties about this before, and I've actually been surprised that was something that they brought up themselves. That millennials talking about the fact that they were upset that they had a penalty or a fine, depending on how it's defined by the Supreme Court.
Right.
But they were upset that they were essentially taxed for not having something that they couldn't afford to begin with, and then they brought it to I should be able to have the right to choose not to buy something if I wanted to. And this surprised me, because this is a talking point from the right that I so often hear, and it's something that I found it was interesting that it's something shared within at least those millennials that I talked to on the left that felt the same kind of feeling. And I think innately millennials in particular love the idea of freedom. They just have a hard time applying these principles consistently across the board because they've never thought about it. So if you ask them questions, that's the best way to get somebody to think, is to ask them a question about why they believe what they believe. And I think you're doing the right thing, man. So I want to ask you a couple more questions, but we got to cut to a commercial break. Would you mind sticking with us through the break?
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Okay. All right. We'll be right back after this break, folks. You don't want to go anywhere. When we come back, I'm going to ask James why he voted for Trump, and I got a few other questions that I want to get to on this, so you guys aren't going to want to miss what's coming up next.
Have you visited the On the Move with Mack Worley store? We've got amazing original design t-shirts, hoodies, cell phone cases, and coffee mugs for sale at OnTheMoveShow.com. Just click the shop link on our homepage. You won't want to miss out on the iHeart Open Carry and Bare Arms t-shirts for only $20 plus shipping. Again, just go to OnTheMoveShow.com and click the shop link on our homepage. Your purchases will help make the On the Move show bigger and better. We appreciate your support. Are you an activist who needs affordable flyers or brochures for passing out literature? Or a political candidate who's looking for business cards, logo designs, yard signs, or vehicle decals? Email me, Latasha Worley, for all your graphic design needs at latashaworley@gmail.com. That's LATOSHA Worley@gmail.com. And don't forget to mention On The Move to get a 10% discount on all graphic design services.
I do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, and that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, pledging my life, my fortune, and my sacred honor. So help me God. Join us at oathkeepers.org.
Broadcasting from deep within the heartland of free America, where liberty still shines bright. You're listening to On the Move with Mack Worley III.
And we're back. I appreciate you all sticking with us through the break. So we're still on the line with James Allsup. Hey, James, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay. So I want to ask, first and foremost, you are a Trump supporter. You're a Trump voter. Why did you vote for Trump? What were your reasons for that?
Yeah, my vote for Trump came down to the first issue that attracted me to Trump's platform was his policies on trade. Not necessarily the tariff policies, but I was reading his website one day, and this is after Rand Paul had dropped out. I was originally a Rand supporter, and I was reading Trump's policy positions on his website, and one of the things he talked about that none of the other candidates were talking about was the need for tougher enforcement of copyright and intellectual property laws with China. And I know this is something that people never talk about when it comes to politics, but I'm studying right now to become a intellectual property lawyer in the future, and that's something that was really encouraging to me because we lose millions, if not billions of dollars every year in trade secrets and design and technology to the Chinese, who use that technology to mass produce items that we've designed in America, and we don't see anything from it. We don't see any return on that development. So it really hampers American research and development. It really hampers American innovation when we spend all the money on R&D and the Chinese are able to utilize it and profit from it, and we're not. So that was really what attracted me to Trump at the start. I like his policies.
Let's focus on that for 1 second. I would love to hear the rest of the reasons why, but I'm just curious. Yeah. All right. So first of all, how is China violating our intellectual property, and what are Trump's solutions to resolve that?
So what they do oftentimes is they will just openly either openly violate patents that American companies have filed in China, and the Chinese government won't enforce it, or they will actually use cyber attacks and hack our American companies and American databases to obtain that information illegally. So the Chinese government is very resistant a lot of times to prosecute Chinese companies when they violate the patents of American companies, even when those the American patents are filed in China, right? So that's an area where the Chinese government is dropping the ball, but it benefits their country economically, so they don't do anything about it. Trump wants to, and this is where a lot of libertarians will disagree with Trump on the solutions for how to enforce these laws more stringently. I know Trump wants to appoint a special trade prosecutor to China to guarantee that China upholds their laws in their courts, which is something that is not currently being done. Trump also wants to start imposing tariffs on Chinese goods coming to the country, which is something that is an issue that many libertarians and many conservatives and Republicans will disagree with them on.
So this essentially the special prosecutor, they're going to sue China somehow, through international courts or something along those lines?
Through international courts or Chinese courts. Yeah, that's my understanding of it now. I haven't really read up on this issue. I was so busy with the campaign that I haven't really, and this is an issue that nobody really talks about, so I wasn't really up to date on this issue, but I know that I read this on his site at the beginning of his campaign, and it's something that drew me in.
I see. So, I mean, that would, to me, just, again, I don't support tariffs, and I do believe in national sovereignty even of other nations. I think that China has a right to do, whatever they want in their own system. Now, as far as intellectual property, I do believe it is important. I just don't think that, tariffing or starting a trade war with China over this kind of stuff is a solution. And I do think that would be detrimental to our economy, which I think is hanging on by a thread. So,
right.
But I understand where you're coming from. So what are some other reasons why you supported Donald Trump?
Well, I like his stance on immigration, to be honest. I think that we need to really take a look at the way our immigration policy works and who we are letting into the country. Because the way the immigration policy works now is people who want to come in legally are very, very disadvantaged in doing so. And they're discouraged from doing so because our immigration policy takes so long for people who want to come in legally. It's often unwieldy, it's confusing. It doesn't really create a good incentive for people to apply to come in legally. And as a result, we see a lot of people just skip the process entirely and come in illegally. And that's a problem. It's unfair to people who took the time to come in and apply legally and to follow the law. But it's also unfair to American workers who are often displaced by illegal immigrant workers. And so with that in mind, I support Trump's plan to stop illegal immigration and to build a physical wall on the southern border, but also his plan to streamline the immigration process and make it so it doesn't take so long for people who are qualified and who we want to come into the country to contribute to the economy.
I see. And, I don't have any issues with that as far as, streamlining the process, stopping illegal immigration. Personally, I'm not a big fan of the wall, so I don't really care if he does or doesn't build that wall.
Right.
I've argued that I don't think that he's actually going to do that. I don't think that he's actually going to build the wall. Do you think that that's actually something he's going to keep his promises on?
Well, we see every time a president gets elected, there's often a disparity between what they promise and what they actually do. And a lot of that's due to the nature of our system. We have a system that's not set up to have a dictator who is all powerful. I think that's a good thing generally because we want Congress to have some say, and we want Congress to be the premier, lawmaking and policy determining body in our government because they're, the most directly represented by the American people. So whether he can get it through Congress, that'll be something that we have to wait and see. Although there is some leeway that he can take within his role as the chief executive that can go a long way towards accomplishing the goal of stopping illegal immigration. For example, instructing the Department of Homeland Security to be more adamant about how they enforce immigration law. That's something that can be done constitutionally. And so I would like him to pursue everything he can to stop illegal immigration constitutionally and then work with Congress to get done what he needs Congress's approval for.
So let's talk about some of the supposed flip-flops that people are claiming that Trump has made now since the election. The Affordable Care Act, otherwise known as Obamacare, he said that there are some parts that he thinks are good parts and that he doesn't want to repeal those parts. I have contended that Donald Trump is going to repeal Obamacare and replace it with Trump Care, and that's what it looks like is potentially happening. First of all, do you think that that he should keep some of these quote unquote good parts, like the people can keep their kids on their policies up to age 26? There will be protections against people or for people who have pre-existing conditions, and they won't be able to be denied during, I'm assuming, some kind of open enrollment period. First of all, do you agree with that? And second of all, do you think that the mandate and things that Trump says that he doesn't like, could those go away and still keep these quote unquote good parts?
Well, I think it was Pew Research who did a poll, and they polled point by point on the Obamacare provisions to determine what people actually supported and what people opposed. The two provisions that people supported were the keeping kids on your plan until they're 26, and the idea that people can't be denied for pre-existing conditions. I really don't like either one, to be honest with you. I don't like the idea that government can tell insurance companies they have to take people with pre-existing conditions because that gets rid of the point of having insurance, right? If I can go my whole life without insurance and then get cancer and then go and demand that an insurance company insure me for my cancer at the same price as a healthy person, they should be able to tell me to get lost and you should have bought insurance beforehand, or at least charge 20 times as much because my care is going to cost 20 times as much. So it kind of flies in the face of why we have insurance at all if we're going to force insurance companies to require people with pre-existing conditions get the same coverage as people who don't have pre-existing conditions. So I don't agree with that at all. And in terms of politics, though, there's a real chance that everything you just said is going to pan out exactly right, that they're going to repeal Obamacare in conjunction with the new healthcare bill. If they do that, that's probably the best we're going to get, to be honest with you, because something like 80% of people support pre-existing conditions being covered. I think, again, that's people being misinformed about what that actually means. People have this idea that an insurance company can just drop you all of a sudden if you get a condition, and that's not right. Insurance companies can't do that. So people have this idea that companies are doing that, which I think is unfortunate because that's not what is actually happening. But politically speaking, that would be the easiest thing for him to get done, is to just repeal the individual mandate, which everybody hates. I think 17% of people support that, and to bring back a new bill that requires insurance companies to take pre-existing conditions and then the 26-year-old kid provision as well.
So I'm hearing a lot of experts say that it's just not possible to maintain the the exemption for people with pre-existing conditions and also keeping kids on there for up to age 26 without also having a mandate, because as expenses for people with pre-existing goes up, you have to find a way basically to get them to force people to buy the product who are going to be at a lower rate and basically subsidize the people with the higher expenses.
Yeah, well, herein lies the problem with government getting involved in the free market, right? If the companies were just allowed to set the prices as necessary, then none of this would happen. Yeah,
absolutely. We have a listener who's sent us a message here on Twitter. I'd love it if you would answer this. He's asking about the TPP. It's Groundswell USA, at Groundswell USA. This is Peter Owens, a friend of mine. He was on the show last week. He's asking, doesn't the TPP include strong copyright and patent protections? He's asking why we would oppose that if, or specifically, I guess you would oppose that if you support strong copyright and patent protections.
It does, but it also comes along with a lot of giving up our national sovereignty and giving up our ability to regulate, our trade policies to the to this international body that we may have some objection to. I mean, TPP is not even going to be ratified by Congress if Obama were to sign it. It looks like Obama's not going to sign it now, but there are just so many problems with TPP in terms of giving up our sovereignty, in terms of it not really being free trade necessarily. It's trade that's kind of manipulated, and government putting their hand on the scale in favor of foreign imports. So I think we can have those copyright protections and those IP protections without all of the baggage that comes along with TPP.
I see. Yeah, and this to me is why I don't want to have the TPP either, because I have concerns about how it could violate U.S. sovereignty and our Constitution. I don't want to create more international bureaucracies and things like that will layer over top of our Constitution and supersede it in any way. So that to me is very concerning. So last question, and we only got a minute or so here. I'm just curious, do you think that Trump should or should not pursue a prosecution against Hillary Clinton? Why or why not? And do you think he's playing some kind of game right now, pretending that he's not going to do something in the hopes that Obama won't pardon her on his way out the door?
Well, I think you're right about the last part, because really it's not the president's job to decide whether people get prosecuted or not. It's the job of the Justice Department. And so constitutionally, Trump's doing the right thing here in terms of not going after her with the power of the executive. I mean, I'm not too old or too young to remember when conservatives were up in arms about the IRS prosecuting conservative organizations and using undue executive authority to suppress conservative free speech. So we really need to be careful about not letting the executive branch become too powerful, because if we let the executive branch become too powerful, it can be used to do things that we kind of like and we agree with, but it can also be used to do things that we vehemently disagree with and that are directly unconstitutional. So as long as Trump follows the Constitution in terms of prosecuting Hillary, I'm okay with it. I think the FBI should investigate the Clinton Foundation. They should look deeper into that than they have so far. And if they do recommend an indictment after a fair investigation and a non-political investigation, then the DOJ should pursue it, and the DOJ should bring charges against Hillary if they are warranted.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think it's kind of a flip on what he said. I don't know if he's playing some kind of shadow game here, trying to wait until Obama's out and hopefully he won't pardon her, that kind of thing. But I do think that the argument could be made to take either course of action. I'll be talking about that a little later in the show for the guests out there. James, first and foremost, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us. Can you blast out your social media, website, YouTube, all that stuff again, so our audience can find you again?
Yeah, of course. I'm on Facebook, James Allsup, ALLSUP. On Twitter, at Real James Allsup. That's, again, ALLSUP. YouTube is the same thing. And you can find where I write over at thelibertyconservative.com. That's thelibertyconservative.com. We have a lot of great stuff over there, a great libertarian blog. Definitely go check that out.
Outstanding. Well, thanks so much for joining us. Will you come back again someday, man?
Absolutely. Yeah, I had a great time. Thank you very much for having me.
Me too. Thanks so much. All right, guys, check him out. That's James Allsup. You can search it in YouTube. You can find his YouTube channel. Check out all the rest of his stuff. He's doing some great things. Thanks so much, James. All right, folks, we're going to cut to a commercial break. When we come back, we're going to be on the line with Dick LaPree. We're going to talk about something very interesting to me. It's collateralized debt obligations. He's going to break it down and give us the 411 on all of this stuff. I'm really excited about it. So anyway, we'll be right back after this break, gang. You don't want to go anywhere. Also, actually, before we go, just want to give a shout out to the 405media.com. Thank you so much for simulcasting us over there. Also, youthrevolt.org. We'll be right back.
Have you visited the On the Move with Mack Worley store? We've got amazing original design t-shirts, hoodies, cell phone cases, and coffee mugs for sale at OnTheMoveShow.com. Just click the shop link on our home page. You won't want to miss out on the iHeart Open Carry and Bare Arms t-shirts for only $20 plus shipping. Again, just go to OnTheMoveShow.com and click the shop link on our home page. Your purchases will help make the On the Move show bigger and better. We appreciate your support. Are you an activist who needs affordable flyers or brochures for passing out literature? Or a political candidate who's looking for business cards, logo designs, yard signs, or vehicle decals? Email me, Latasha Worley, for all your graphic design needs at latashaworley@gmail.com. That's LATOSHA Worley@gmail.com. And don't forget to mention On the Move to get a 10% discount on all graphic design services.
This is Dan Sandini of DaylightDisinfectant.com, citizen journalist, friend of the late Andrew Breitbart, and cohort of James O'Keefe. I listen to On the Move with Mack Worley because the only time he's wrong is when he disagrees with me.
I do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, and that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, pledging my life, my fortune, and my sacred honor. So help me God. Join us at oathkeepers.org.
Welcome to On the Move.
And we're back. This is the second hour of the program. I certainly appreciate you all sticking with us. All right, so at this point, we're going to be joined by a friend of mine. His name is Dick LaPree. He's a senior loan advisor for RPM Mortgage, and he's been doing mortgages since 1991 and writing a weekly newsletter about mortgages and the economy in general since 1995. He is from New York City and has a degree in physics from Notre Dame. Hey, Dick, are you on the line?
I'm here. Thank you for having me, Matt.
Oh, thanks so much for joining me. I am really excited to pick your brain about these collateralized debt obligations and first and foremost how they work and why they're risky. I was hoping you could start with first like how they're set up, and I know it's very complicated. So if you could try to simplify it as much as possible, I'd appreciate it.
Well, let's talk about, first of all, there's a set of things called collateralized debt obligations. That's the general family, and that includes mortgage debt, credit card debt, auto loans, and whatnot. But I think the thing that you're most interested in is that debt associated with mortgages.
Yes, sir.
The thing that was basically responsible for the liquidity crisis in 2008.
Yes, sir.
So let's understand why these things exist, or why is it that banks decide to pool mortgages together and sell them? And in essence, there's several reasons. Let's say that you were a bank in Detroit. You know, you're a local bank, you make a lot of loans in Detroit, and you'd probably find that you were out of business because there were a lot of defaults there. So one reason for collateralizing mortgages and selling them is just to sort of spread the risk out geographically. You know, if you're a bank in a certain area and the economy in that area tanks, you're going to wind up out of business. So it makes sense to pool mortgages together and then sell those things to other people. Now, how is that done? Basically, it's done, in other words, let's distinguish between residential mortgages and commercial mortgages. And those are done through separate channels. Residential mortgages are mortgages on houses that are 1 to 4 families. Commercial mortgages are apartment buildings and true commercial properties. So residential mortgages, for the most part, were backed by, the collateralization of these is done through two government entities, Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. There's also other sorts of government loans for VA and FHA, but let's keep those aside for a second, and let's just concentrate on Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. So those were basically the government purchased these government-sponsored entities. Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae purchased single-family mortgages from banks that originated them, and then sold them. And another reason, so what we're doing is, number one, what banks are doing is avoiding the risk associated with having too many loans in one place. Mm-hmm. So you sell the loans to Fannie Mae. Fannie Mae then pools those mortgages together, and then what's called a participation certificate. A piece of that pool of mortgages is sold off to different investors. So what you've basically done is take, let's say, hundreds or thousands of loans, mix them together, and then sell pieces of those loans to other people. So basically, you're selling the cash flow from the borrower to the person who eventually holds the interest in the participation certificate, the interest in the collateralized debt obligation. So another reason, so number one, the banks have gotten rid of the risk associated with default and passed that along to other people. The other thing to recognize is that banks are bound by what are called Basel Capital Accords. This is a set of international banking regulations that basically tells you how many loans you can make according to how much capital you have. And to boil it down, once you collateralize mortgages, you can hold twice the amount in millions of dollars, if you will, of mortgages that have been collateralized into securities than you can if they're individual, because the risk on pools of mortgages is only half the risk on single mortgages. So basically, collateralizing the mortgages enables a bank to hold twice as much mortgage debt as they would if they held the loans individually.
So it allows them to not have as much liquidity or equity, I guess, capital available. They can.
It doubles the amount of mortgages they could make per given dollar of capital, because again, these various types of things that are a bank's assets. Remember, the mortgages that a banks make or the loans that a banks make are its assets. So, Basel Capital Accord sets certain multipliers. For example, an unsecured loan or a commercial loan needs to be 100% offset by capital. An unsecured mortgage needs to be 50% offset. A loan that's secured into like a Fannie Mae participation certificate only needs 25% capital. A government loan, the loan made to the government, counts zero. There is no risk associated with that. So basically, by securitizing these, it enables a bank to hold and receive interest, if you will, on twice as many mortgages as it could per unit of capital as if they weren't securitized.
So can you explain how separating these? Because the way I understand it, they separate these CDOs into tranches, and people invest into them. It's basically they're selling these mortgages off for investment opportunities for people, but they divide it into these 3 separate tranches. Can you explain that system?
Well, yes. And now that's something different. What I was just talking about are Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae before the mortgage mess loans. Now, what you're talking about is really mortgages that are not collateralized by Freddie Mac or Fannie Mae, but basically mortgages that were collateralized and pulled together by Wall Street investment banks. And these were, for the most part, were, let's just call them B paper loans, loans that were less quality than Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae used to demand. Okay, there's another issue which we'll get to later, but what you're talking about is privately securitized mortgage-backed securities, privately securitized residential mortgage-backed securities. Mm-hmm. So what happened was there was everybody wanted a home, and so people relaxed mortgage standards. And what you're talking about is what Wall Street investment banks did was really weaken mortgage lending standards and basically open them up. And the way that they did this, and this is what you're talking about, is they took a pool of mortgages, and let's just say they took 10% of the pool of mortgages was really prime paper stuff. And then, as you're describing it, they were divided into various tranches or qualities, and each of these things was given there was certain risk associated with it. But the key thing was the way that Wall Street investment banks made these, and not just the Wall Street investment banks, but the truly guilty parties were the debt rating firms that established a quality for this debt. And back then there were only 3 debt rating firms: Standard & Poor's, Fitch, and Moody's. So what happened was the Wall Street investment banks and the debt rating firms worked out a plan to make all of these mortgages look like basically investment quality, or what's called AA paper mortgages. So the deal was, if you had as little as 10% of the group of mortgages that were investment quality, the entire security was regarded as investment quality. And that's really what you're talking about. You say, what was the scam? The scam was pension, and investment quality is important because it means that pension funds could buy these. So by creating this false impression that 100% of the loans in the pool and the mortgages were investment grade, people were deceived and bought a lot of loans that were going to go bad.
Also, weren't these rating agencies that you were talking about somewhat deceived as well because of the lack of transparencies in these CDOs?
I don't think that the rating agencies were deceived at all. I think that they completely knowingly knew what was going on. There's absolutely no way that, look, their job is to literally look at the paper as it's coming in and to rate it. So I think that they were completely aware.
I see. And
remember, they were being paid by the Wall Street investment banks. So in a sense, part of the problem was this made no sense. It would be akin to myself giving an individual mortgage to a buyer and having him tell me what the property was worth and what his credit quality was. No, I should be the one doing that. So in that sense, the problem here, or the bad part of the concept, was that it wasn't the person who was buying the debt that established the quality of the debt, but the person who was selling it. So the Wall Street investment banks who were selling the debt paid the debt rating firms to establish basically bogus credit ratings for the paper that they were selling.
Yes, sir. So as far as these weakening lending standards that you were talking about, was that entirely weakened as a result of like the CEOs from the banks who decided to make more risky loans, or from what I understand, it was partially was the government's fault as well, where they had made it illegal to not issue some of these loans?
Well, yes. There were really 2 parts of it. One was what I just described. Let's just describe it as the collusion among other people of Wall Street investment banks and debt rating firms. But the other thing to understand is that the demise of Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, well, not the demise, but the bankruptcy and subsequent takeover by the United States Treasury Department, was entirely at the hands of the federal government. This thing happened because of something that occurred back in 1993, which was called the National Home Ownership Strategy. And this was a concept, basically Bill Clinton had the idea, and it was a very, something that sounds very sensible, which is if we want to have sort of social order and encourage family values and two-parent families, then this is much easier if people own their own home. The notion is we'll have greater social order if we have a higher level of home ownership. And that certainly sounds like a reasonable proposition. And Clinton ordered the guy who was head of HUD at the time, Henry Cisneros, to come up with a plan to basically enable more people to buy homes. And Cisneros created a thing called the National Home Ownership Strategy. And I'm going to read to you from something that I wrote back in 2011.
Okay.
And this is part of what the National Home Ownership Strategy said. For many potential home buyers, the lack of cash available to accumulate the required down payment and closing costs is the major impediment to purchasing a home. This is a great sentence. Listen to this one. Other households do not have sufficient available income to make monthly payments on mortgages financed at market interest rates for standard loan terms. Financing strategies fueled by the creativity and resources of the private and public sectors should address both of these financial barriers to home ownership. So think of what's said here. Lack of cash, do not have sufficient income to make the payments, fueled by creativity. This is exactly what happened.
Yeah.
The government mandated that loans be made to people who didn't have the cash to make a down payment and did not have sufficient income to make the payments. And this isn't something that just simply was something that Bill Clinton did back in, and this really started in 1995, but it got progressively worse and worse, even after Clinton was no longer president and Bush was president. It got to the point where, let me find my notes here, back when this thing got pushed to the point where just before the Lehman bankruptcy in 2008, HUD was mandating that 52% of the loans that Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae bought had to be from people with what were called low to moderate incomes. So it wasn't just a concept, it was something that was literally mandated. So Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae were put, in the position of having to buy the majority of loans from people who probably previously would not have qualified. So interestingly, just at the time that this was happening, just at the time the Lehman bankruptcy occurred and the liquidity crisis happened, was just when HUD was still pushing to weaken mortgage lending standards. So my point is, there's really two separate paths here. One was HUD mandating essentially weakened lending standards and everybody basically following up and selling loans to Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. That, along with the bogus practices of the Wall Street investment banks and the debt rating firms. So we really had two forces which were driving. Look, everything happened because all of a sudden a lot of people who in fact couldn't make the payments on homes were buying homes. And inevitably, they were going to wind up stop making the payments and going into default. And the sources of all those people buying home were really two completely different directions. One, what we just described about HUD and Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, and the other that we talked about with the Wall Street investment banks and the debt rating firms. So two forces separately with completely different motivations helped create the problem.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I've been hearing the narrative for years, since like the Occupy Wall Street movement, that it was the fat cat bankers who are to blame for the collapse, and they completely seem to gloss over the fact that there was this HUD mandate that actually forced banks to make more riskier loans than what they wanted to do because of the denials of loans was having a disparate impact on minority communities, which have been getting denied or had been getting denied at a disproportionate rate than any other demographic. So some of this, with as you're saying, with the national home ownership strategy was a result or caused the results of these bankers engaging in these CDOs that caused the financial collapse, and it's the ones that were that you were talking about that have no real practical business purpose, that were basically it's a shell game with the money, and it wasn't really adding any real liquidity or capital to the market. Do you disagree with any of that?
Well, no. I mean, I think that's essentially correct. But I think the key thing to note here is that when this happened, the government did a very good job of disguising its responsibility. As a matter of fact, just after the Lehman bankruptcy, the part on HUD's website about the national home ownership strategy disappeared for about a year. It was people like myself who screamed about it that in part caused it to reappear about a year after it disappeared. So one thing that the government did very quickly was disguise its role in causing the mess. And the government has a lot of control over the media and sort of how people think. And since Wall Street had indeed screwed up, it wasn't difficult to convince people to just talk about the guilt that Wall Street investment banks had, because they were guilty, but they did leave out the discussion about HUD and essentially mandating destruction of Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. That's something you just don't hear discussed. It's the way the government operates. When it makes a mistake, it very rarely accepts blame for its mistake. It blames other people, or the administration blames the previous administration. Nobody sort of accepts responsibility for their mistakes. And, the government did act in the sense that it removed HUD from having HUD has no role of this anymore. It doesn't regulate Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. A new entity was created that regulates Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae.
So how did interest rates play a role in the 2008 financial collapse?
I don't think that interest rates, honestly, in a sense, I don't think that interest rates were at all important, because people could have made the payments no matter what the interest rate was.
Yeah.
Whether interest rates were 3%, 4%, 5%, 6%, or 7%, the people who were going into default would have made the payments. So I don't think that this was something you often hear, the Fed lowered interest rates, and interest rates were so low that people were buying homes. I don't buy that at all. The extent to which that happened was so insignificant that it really wasn't part of the problem. Interest rates were not part of the problem. Literally, those words that I read, you read of the National Home Ownership Strategy, which basically said, "Hey, let's make loans to people who can't afford them." Well, you know what? That didn't work out too well. It doesn't make any difference what the interest rates probably could have been zero, and the people wouldn't have been able to make the payments, even if they were trying to make 360 payments of whatever the loan amount was over 30 years. So I don't think interest rates were a factor at all.
Yeah, again, if you can't afford the payment, you didn't have the money to get the loan in the first place, you didn't have the income either, then obviously it doesn't matter what the interest is. If you can't afford the payment, you shouldn't have gotten the loan in the first place. The reason why I mention it, though, is because I was doing some reading this week, and there was a I can't remember who wrote it. It was a scholarly paper I was looking at in a database somewhere, and they were talking about how low interest rates can actually have the potential to create asset bubbles, and that the asset bubble of the 2008 stock market, or the 2008 housing market, was created in part because of the low interest rates at the time. Do you disagree with that at all?
I disagree with that. I think as a contrast to that, look at what's happening with equities at the present time. What's happened over the past several years is one of the reasons that we've had an equity bubble is because corporations have literally done a tremendous amount. They've borrowed money to buy back their own stock, so that the value, the share price of companies has been going up, not because the value of the company inherently is going up, but solely because there's fewer shares outstanding. When a company does a buyback, it tends to drive up the share price. So lower interest rates have enabled corporations to buy back their own stock, increase the price of the stock, and along with that, probably provide some fairly hefty bonuses for the executives whose compensation is based on stock price. So I think that one place where you've seen asset bubbles is literally in equities. So I think low interest rates have created an asset bubble in equities. The corporations have borrowed money, done stock buybacks, driven up equity prices.
I see. So, as far as too big to fail, can you explain to our listeners out there what that phrase means and why we even did the bailouts in the first place with Fannie and Freddie? Why were these considered too big to fail?
Well, I don't know let's distinguish Fannie and Freddie from when you're saying too big to fail. To me, too big to fail is referring to big banks, okay, not Freddie and Fannie. Okay. I think that the too big to fail concept is part of a broader thing, and that is what's really happened consequent to Dodd-Frank and the various regulations from the Consumer Financial Protection Board, which is the entity that really actualizes and details Dodd-Frank. What's happened is basically it's become difficult for small players, let's say in the mortgage, to participate in the mortgage business simply because the cost of complying with regulations is so large that the vast majority of people who were mortgage brokers no longer exist. And an entity that I work for, the company that I work for, which is Residential Pacific Mortgage, is what's called a mortgage bank, meaning we get credit lines from very large commercial banks. We make mortgages using those credit lines and essentially immediately resell them. We resell them either directly to Fannie Mae or to a large commercial bank. And a lot of people who had business models similar to Residential Pacific Mortgage could no longer afford the cost of compliance. So one of the things that's happened is the little guys have been driven out by the sheer amount of regulations and the cost of keeping up with those regulations. When I say keeping up with the regulations, there's sort of two ways that you see that. One is the sheer cost of purchasing the software to do it or developing the software to do it, and the other is just having the staff of people necessary to keep up with compliance. A company like ours has 15 people who do nothing other than prepare the initial disclosures that people get. That didn't exist before. It used to be the case that a loan agent prepared the disclosures and said, "Here, this is what your closing costs are going to be." Now, because of various regulations, we find it necessary to employ 15 people just to keep these things dead accurate. So the cost, part of the problem with too big to fail is that it's more a case of too small to be able to compete. So big banks have, basically the little guys are being driven out of, for example, the mortgage business. And I don't know if that really answers your question as to what too big to fail really means. I think the underlying question there is one of banks after 2008 have sort of become merged together in the sense that, well, what once commercial banks are now merged with what were formerly investment banks. So commercial banks were banks, like what were, Bank of America and Wells Fargo. And basically all of these people have now taken over the big, what were Wall Street investment banks. So the commercial banks were basically banks that made loans to individuals or maybe to companies, and investment banks were people who just did that. They did things like initial public offerings and whatnot. And so now the two have sort of gotten merged together, and I don't know if that's really healthy.
Yeah, that would seem like too big to fail hasn't gone away if these things are merging together. Do you think that we're still at risk of a systemic collapse if one of these big major banks, one of the top 5 banks or investment corporations, if they start to have issues? Do you think that we'll see another bank bailout potentially?
Well, I mean, can it happen? Yes. Are there signs that it's going to happen? No. I think that one thing is banks are simply required to retain more capital now. so that these capital requirements, as I was talking about before about Basel capital codes, are just stronger. So banks are inherently have to have more capital than they had previously. Not only do they have to have more, but they're discreetly having even more than the minimum required. So it's not the case that any big bank in the country, and let's face it, there's really only 4 big banks, any of the big banks are in danger of failing for lack of capital. And what happened in 2008 wasn't simply a capital issue. It was a liquidity issue, meaning that what happened is nobody trusted anybody anymore because nobody knew each bank. I mean, a lot of banks do what's called interbank lending, meaning let's just say a bank makes a big loan to somebody and they might not have sufficient. They give some big company a $5 billion credit line, and they don't know when they're going to need it. But at a given day, a bank might need to borrow cash from another bank. So that's just called interbank lending. And one thing what happened in 2008 was essentially a liquidity crisis whereby basically nobody trusted anybody and banks didn't engage in interbank lending, and that entire system of banks borrowing from one another overnight just simply failed. And basically, again, what we have is a liquidity crisis, and the Federal Reserve stepped in with all different kinds of liquidity enhancement programs to provide liquidity to the banking business, basically because banks didn't trust one another. So the Fed said, look, if you guys don't trust one another, trust us. We'll lend the money to you. You don't have to borrow it from another bank.
So I'm looking at a report right now from before the 2008 financial crisis reforms. I think banks were supposed to have a minimum of 8% of capital on hand, and it looks like by 2019 they're supposed to have 10.5%.
Yes.
Okay. So first of all, do you think that's enough to prevent the same kind of financial crisis, or do they need more, or is that too much?
I think that judging from where we are at present, that's probably sufficient. I don't think there's any reason to. So the question is, eventually, the question is, are we going to do something this stupid again? Well, probably. That's just human nature. People get lost and they wind up doing stupid things. So are banks going to do something stupid sometime down the future? Yeah, that's just the nature of people. We always do. If anything is going well, we find a way to screw it up. So eventually, we'll find a way to screw it up no matter what the capital requirements are. I don't think that it in any way, that said, and again, I speak partly in humor, but not entirely. That said, I don't think anything like this is about to happen anytime in the near future, partly because mortgage lending standards are so ridiculously strict now that the chance of this originating from mortgage debt is really small. The only kind of bad loans that have really been made recently to any extent, in addition to, let's say, student loans that are guaranteed by the government, are automobile loans. It's worth noting that automobile companies have had relatively few good years here, and auto sales have been strong, largely because automobile lending standards have been relaxed in a much similar way to the way that mortgage loans were. And again, the system for securitizing automobile loans are also collateralized, but not quite in the same formalized manner that mortgages were. So I'm making the observation that if there's any risk to be taken or losses to be taken by banks, they're probably going to be taking more loans from from losses on automobile loans than on real estate loans.
So why were the auto loan lending standards relaxed?
Because banks wanted to make loans and make money.
Oh, okay.
It was like the perception was that even though there was probably some risk to be taken, that interest rates were high enough that the return on investment, banks are taking in money at an extremely low rate and making, let's say, automobile loans to people with shaky credit at, 8% interest. They go, well, even if a chunk of these go bad, we still have a profit.
I see. So it wasn't the result of government involvement like it was.
No,
okay.
Not at all.
I
There
see.
was no mandate to make. There was no car ownership strategy.
I see. Okay. All right. So we have to cut to a commercial break. Would you mind sticking with us to the break, Dick?
No problem.
Awesome. Okay, so we'll be right back with more with Dick LaPree. I'm really excited to pick his brain. I got a bunch of other questions we're going to get to. You guys don't want to go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Latasha Worley, and I work with candidates to creatively and effectively communicate their message to voters. I offer professional graphic design services, from yard signs to flyers, from logos to vehicle magnets. Email me today at latashaworley@gmail.com. That's LATOSHA Worley@gmail.com for a quote on items for your campaign. Have you visited the On the Move with Mack Worley store? We've got amazing original design t-shirts, hoodies, cell phone cases, and coffee mugs for sale at OnTheMoveShow.com. Just click the shop link on our homepage. You won't want to miss out on the iHeart Open Carry and Bare Arms t-shirts for only $20 plus shipping. Again, just go to OnTheMoveShow.com and click the shop link on our homepage. Your purchases will help make the On the Move show bigger and better. We appreciate your support.
Oath Keepers is a nonpartisan association of current active duty military, reserve, guard, veterans, peace officers, and firefighters who will fulfill the oath we swore, with the support of like-minded citizens who take an oath to stand with us, to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. So help us God. Join us at oathkeepers.org.
Broadcasting from deep within the heartland of free America, where liberty still shines bright. You're listening to On the Move with Mack Worley III.
And we're back. We're still on the line with Dick LaPree. I'm really excited to continue talking with him. We have a bunch of banking-related questions in regards to the 2008 financial collapse. And Dick, I'm just curious, if you could lay out some of the major changes that we've seen since the 2008 financial reforms like Dodd-Frank. What are some of the biggest things that they changed as a result of that?
Well, one thing that they've done is basically eliminate anything other than generic mortgages. This is done by defining something which is called a qualified mortgage. So from our perspective as a mortgage lender, we're interested in making loans that fit the Consumer Financial Protection Board's definition of what we call qualified mortgage, or QM. And so this basically has to do with I think the most important thing, frankly, is full documentation, that there is no longer any such thing as a stated income loan or an abbreviated documentation loan. These loan files now are so complete that they're ridiculous. The amount of stuff that we need from people is insane. At least now people expect it. People know that they need this. So number one is ridiculously document everything so we have everybody's tax returns, and establish maximum debt ratio. So for Fannie Mae, the maximum debt ratio is 45%. For Freddie Mac, the maximum debt ratio is 49.9%. So putting ceilings on debt ratios and establishing documentation, I think, are the two things which have most narrowed down the mortgages, so that now we're making loans to people who can, in fact, make the payments.
I see. So some of those national homeownership strategy standards, the mandates on that, some of those have been walked back. Is that right?
Well, essentially, have been entirely walked back. In other words, those requirements that Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae buy loans that people could no longer make the payment on, such as I talked about in the National Homeownership Strategy Guidelines, simply don't exist anymore. It's quite the opposite. So basically, it's just that the mandate has been made that, look, if you make a qualified mortgage, you don't have to worry about getting sued by the borrowers. But if you make a loan that's not a qualified mortgage, and it falls outside this, then you don't have this sort of overreaching exemption that you can't be sued. So the definition of qualified mortgage, basically requiring full documentation and limiting the debt ratio, I think those are the key things that have limited mortgages, so that there aren't a lot of bad mortgages being made anymore.
I see. So, as a result of these reforms, would you say that limiting the debt ratio and things like that has that had the effect that they were intending? Do you think we're more secure now? Do you think that we're still at risk in some ways? What are your thoughts?
No, I think that we're definitely more secure. That's a fact. I'm 100% certain of that. I think that what it did was it eliminated some people who, when I first got into this business, the notion of sort of a stated income loan always existed. And back at the beginning, when I got into this in 1991, a stated income loan was basically something that was made for people who own their own business. And I think the concept simply was, look, people who own their own businesses tend to beat the heck out of their Schedule Cs. They take all kinds of deductions that a normal W-2 worker wouldn't. They make their car payments. Maybe they pay for part of their mortgage by paying themselves some rent for a home office, an office in their home or whatever. They make their own, health insurance payments. So the notion simply was, look, people who are self-employed, we know, beat the heck out of their Schedule Cs. So looking at their income in the same strict way that we'd look at a W-2 person doesn't make any sense. So let's let people who are self-employed do stated income loans, and we'll just sort of take their word. So if a guy owns his own business, has good credit, is putting 20% down, we're not going to be quite so scrupulous about documenting his income. We're going to give him a break. We're going to just let him state his income. And that worked out okay for a while, but then what happened was the stated income thing, subsequent to the National Homeownership Strategy, got basically to the point where anybody could do a stated income loan. Didn't make any difference you were self-employed, W-2 or whatever. You went out there and you just put down whatever you want. One of the interesting things, and I want to mention here, that subsequent to all this mess, I did consulting on probably 7 or 8 different criminal cases for defense attorneys of people who were accused of mortgage fraud, or usually you wind up getting not accused of mortgage fraud, but of wire fraud. So, and one of the things I think that impressed me the most about looking at what people who've done was the sheer width of creativity that people use to basically make money by scamming mortgages. And one thing that would have prevented it was, in all of these cases that I looked at, every one of the borrowers had filled out what was called an IRS Form 4506. So I'm doing a stated income mortgage, but I'm signing a form that says that the lender can go to the IRS and get a copy of my tax returns. Not exactly a copy of my tax returns, but basically a computer printout of the numbers on the first 2 pages of your 1040. Mm-hmm. And a significant thing is that in none of these cases had the lender actually done this. So lenders were taking stated income loans, or if you will, overstated income loans, but never bothering to execute the form that would have allowed them to go to the IRS and get the person's actual income. So I think the point is, not only were people lying about their income, but banks were deliberately doing nothing to avoid finding out what their income actually was.
I see.
They didn't want to know what the person's income was, probably because they knew that it wasn't accurate.
Yeah, plausible
so banks deliberately kept themselves... Excuse me, go ahead.
Was that basically them giving themselves plausible deniability?
Well, in de facto, yes. In other words, the people... Yeah, well, I would describe it as implausible deniability, but yes, it gave them deniability, but I wouldn't rate it as plausible. And I mean that literally. People knew what was going on and deliberately avoided finding out what people's income was. I think the other thing to realize is that when the whole mortgage mess occurred, the banks that had done all of this were the people who were stuck with the bad paper. But the people who were doing this, the people who were buying these bad loans and encouraging it, they're the ones who took the losses because they didn't offload this stuff quickly enough. So when all of this happened, post-Lehman, what happened was the entire process of people buying mortgages from each other, the whole mortgage securitization process, literally in an instant ground to an absolute halt. And the banks that had originated these bad mortgages had nobody to sell them to, and they were stuck with them. And that's the irony of this. They're the people who took who took the biggest losses. Mm-hmm. That when we talk about the bailout, the question I always ask is, well, who is it that got bailed out? There's three sets of people, from my perspective, who were involved. One is the depositors, right? Those are the people. Remember, the deposits are a bank's liability. Well, the depositors didn't take losses. The banks and the bank employees themselves, didn't really take any losses. That what we're really doing, in a sense, was the people who took losses were the equity holders of the bank, the people who owned shares of Countrywide, for example, or Washington Mutual, which was the gigantic conglomeration of basically all the S&Ls out here on the West Coast. Those people got nothing. Their stock went down to zero. Mm-hmm. Countrywide lost probably 85% of its value. So the people who took the big losses were the people who should have, which were the owners of the banks. The employees of the banks and the executives of the banks themselves, I guess, wound up doing okay to the extent that they didn't lose their jobs. But the people who were ultimately bailed out were the depositors. Because if banks had been allowed to collapse and all of this had been written off, then there wouldn't have been enough deposit insurance to cover the depositors. So my point is the real bailout was of depositors. It wasn't of the people who owned the banks, because the people who owned the banks took losses because the value of their shares, the shares that they held, went down significantly. In cases such as Washington Mutual, went down by 100%.
So, correct me if I'm wrong. I was under the impression that many of the depositors, I guess you can technically classify them as investors, I suppose, is like pensioners.
Well, the depositors aren't investors. Depositors are depositors. The liabilities that a bank has are to its investors and its depositors. Okay. Mm-hmm. What I'm saying is that the two sets of people, the depositors were made whole, but the investors, the shareholders, were not.
So the shareholders and things like pensioners that had their money invested in these senior tranches of the CDOs, from what I'm understanding, a lot of them lost a lot of money in the 2008 financial collapse.
Well, now we're getting into an entirely different space, which is who took the credit loss. Now, we've just been talking about this without discussing, and again, I don't know how much time you have.
I got another 13 minutes at least.
Okay, there's another entire area here of which is sometimes here, which are called credit default swaps. And that is the key, I think, to what you're talking about, which is who is it who really took the loss? Now, credit default swaps are basically this. Well, let's go back to when we talked about banks securitizing mortgages. Okay, once you securitize a mortgage, somebody is buying that, but then they say, well, you know what? I like buying this. I like getting this cash flow, but I want as a guarantee that if somebody stops making the mortgage payments, I still get the cash flow. So basically, a credit default swap is putting the potential loss off on a third party, so that if a Wall Street investment bank is putting these things into tranches and selling these tranches to various people, then if those people purchase credit default swaps, or if the Wall Street investment banks creates the credit default swaps and sells them along with the actual security to a third party, then that third party is not, then the party that they sell it to is not taking the risk, but another party is taking the risk. Now, interestingly, credit default swaps have an amazing history, which is they didn't exist before 1989. And in 1989, what happened was the Exxon Valdez, if you remember, I don't know how old you are to remember what the Exxon Valdez was, but this was an oil tanker which was headed from Alaska to Long Beach, and it hit a reef in Prince William Sound in Alaska, and it spilled a bunch of oil. And eventually what happened was a bunch of people sued Exxon, and Exxon had a judgment of $287 million in compensatory damages and $5 billion in punitive damages. So Exxon then says, we better appeal this case. But what they wanted to make sure was that they didn't tie up that $5 billion worth of capital, because otherwise they would have had to put $5 billion worth of capital. They would have to set that aside on their balance sheet as just simply an offset and idle it until the time when they actually had to pay that $5 billion. Mm-hmm. What Exxon did was they went to J.P. Morgan. They got a $4.8 billion credit line in case they lost the appeal. And because J.P. Morgan was the bank, they said, yeah, we'll give you the $4.8 billion. But then J.P. Morgan says, well, we don't want to really tie up the $4.8 billion of our capital. And this is literally when credit default swaps were created. That J.P. Morgan, a woman named Blythe Masters, who ran the interest rate swaps department at J.P. Morgan, just literally said, why don't we just sort of sell the credit risk to a third party? And that's what they did. They created this thing. It didn't even have a name at the time. There was no such thing as credit default swap. They just did this so that, and the reason for doing this, again, let's go back to what I was talking about the Basel Capital Accords. Once J.P. Morgan had created this credit default swap and sold the risk off to a third party, it no longer had to tie up its capital. So it was free to use that capital for whatever purpose it wanted.
Who were
so
they
the purpose
selling?
of credit default swaps. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm just saying, I was going to ask, who were they selling? What was the third party that they were selling?
I don't have any idea who they really sold it to, if anybody really made. I mean, I honestly, I don't know. Or I doubt if it was sold just to one party. I would imagine that it was created and sold into pieces where probably, I was just going to guess that they sold it in probably at least 10 pieces.
Mm-hmm. So would that be investment opportunities that they're selling off, basically the same way like a CDO works in those tranches?
Well, yeah. In other words, it's a cash flow. It's just think of it like insurance. In other words, why does a company take insurance premiums for you? Right? They just thought that so insurance companies do well as long as my house doesn't burn down. Mm-hmm. Right? So it's like insurance. It's exchange of. You're getting a small amount of money in exchange for having to take a big risk. So a credit default swap is, in that sense, it's just like fire insurance on your house.
I see. So as far as these CDOs, the collateralized debt obligations, I'm hearing that they're coming back now. There's been a resurgence from investors who are trying to make bigger returns on their investment, obviously, and there was a big drop off after 2008. So I have several questions about this. First, these new CDOs that are back, are you aware if they still allow the investor, or I'm sorry, if they still allow the banks to basically collateralize the debt and then get that debt off the books, basically, and then they can still have they get more debt available for their debt ratio. Has that been fixed by the reforms, or is that still on?
No, that still happens. The debt that's out there now is not so much merged. We don't see a lot of privately collateralized mortgage debt right now. That is to say, the stuff that's jumbo mortgages, the non-Freddie, Fannie, the non-conforming jumbo mortgages, in general, is being held by the banks themselves. They're not selling it. They're not collateralizing. They're just holding the paper because their cost of borrowing is so low and the interest rates are so attractive. They just see it as something that's a moneymaker right now. I do think that at a certain point in the future, when the cost of borrowing goes up, you will see these banks collateralize these mortgages that they're now making. But hopefully at that point, it won't be a matter of collateralizing mortgages that were just made, but collateralizing mortgages that maybe have been around for 5 years. And I think that once somebody has been making the payments for 5 years, you can be a little bit more confident that they're going to be making the payments in the future. So the stuff that's collateralized right now is basically not mortgages, but it's things like credit card debt and auto loan debt.
I see. So there's not necessarily, like, just because it's a CDO, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad or risky investment or a bad banking tactic. There could be potentially good CDOs and bad CDOs, correct?
Absolutely. So, and the amount of bad CDOs out there is much smaller than it was back in let's say 2008 when it was essentially maxed out.
Yeah, and now in 2013, for example, Deutsche Bank they launched a $8.7 billion CDO. They broke it down into two different tranches, and they were giving investors in those tranches payments basically between 8% and 14.6%. Do you know if what Deutsche Bank is doing or what other bankers with CDOs are doing? Are these? Go ahead. Sorry.
I don't know specifically what Deutsche Bank is doing. I do know that I think that they're about to approach, an existential crisis. I think they have a lot of bad loans on their books, but again, I don't know what they are because they weren't certainly any mortgages that we generated.
Mm. And as far as the CDO transparency, I was doing some reading on this, and from what I can tell, it's still very difficult, even for rating agencies. I know you said that you thought that they were complicit in that, and they very well could be. But I was hearing that it's very difficult to basically see what's going on with these CDOs. There's not a whole lot of transparency with it, and it makes it difficult for people to even know what kind of investments or what kind of mortgages or what kind of loans that they're actually investing in. Do you know if there's any truth to that?
No, I think that there's truth in it. But again, I don't think that, if you're not capable of really looking into the individual loans that make up a CDO, then you're not doing your job as a debt rating firm. And that's it. It's not like it can't be done. It can be done, but people aren't trying hard enough to do it.
I see. So you're confirming though that it is difficult to look at what's going on in the CDOs, but it's just not being done. People aren't trying hard enough, right?
No, I don't think that it's. Look, people just need to try harder, okay? And the other thing to understand is that when this all occurred, originally there were just 3 debt rating firms, and that's one problem, was that there was this government-mandated oligarchy of only allowing 3 debt rating firms out there. And now, I don't know what the number is now, but the last time I looked at it, there were 8 large debt rating firms. So the number of debt rating firms is a lot larger right now. But I think, again, and I said this before, one of the points is that it should be the people who are buying the debt who pool their resources together and get a rating on the debt that they're buying, rather than have the guys who are selling the debt rate the debt. It just doesn't make any sense to me to trust the guy who's selling you something to tell you what it's worth. If you're buying something, you should have it appraised. If you're buying a house, you should have the house appraised, not have the seller tell you what he thinks it's worth.
I see.
And that's basically what's happening with debt. People who are buying debt should assume the responsibility collectively of getting the quality of the debt that they're buying rated. And it's just never been done that way.
So regarding our current situation, the economy as it is right now, do you think that we have any asset bubbles that are going on right now? You mentioned before a couple of them, like the auto loan market. Do you see any other bubbles out there?
Well, again, I think that we have, to a certain extent, an equity bubble, which was driven by low interest rates and and to a certain extent corporate buybacks. But I think that far and away, the one overreaching problem which is holding back our economy and will continue to hold back our economy is debt. And debt exists in three different places. Government debt, federal government debt, state government debt, local government debt, corporate debt. That's what I was talking about before. Tremendous increase in corporate debt to take out loans to buy back shares, and consumer debt. So we have indebted governments, indebted corporations, and indebted individuals. And that debt, look, what is debt? Debt is the residue of money you spent in the past that you can't spend today or in the near future. And with the amount of debt that we have, it's going to be very difficult to get GDP growth where we need it to be. And where we need it to be is something over 4%, not the 2% where it's been stuck on the average for the past 5 years. So what is the big evil? Debt. And the thing to look at, the one single thing that people should look at when they're looking at this is look at the federal government and look at its ratio of debt to GDP. And right now, that number is 106%. So the government debt, again, I'm talking about federal government debt, literally Treasury debt. I'm not talking about its obligations on the Medicare or Social Security. Just Treasury debt totals 106% of GDP. And a very good economist whom I read all the time is a gentleman named Lacey Hunt. And Lacey makes the point that basically, if you look at every economy that gets into trouble, every world economy that gets into trouble, once its debt to GDP ratio gets over 95%, it's screwed.
So ours is at what, you said 160 right now?
106, 106%. Japan is like something over 250%. Japan is a country that was once going to dominate the entire planet, back whatever it was, 30 years ago. What happened? Took on too much debt. Now their debt to GDP ratio is up above 250%, and nothing that they do seems to be able to stimulate the economy.
I see.
So I think I'm saying, what is the big thing to be concerned about right now? And it's debt to GDP. And unfortunately, there's not a lot that we can do about it. I guess what I'm saying is the damage has already been done. The damage has been done by, the way, to me, the way I perceive the government operates is, it's like, vote for me and I'll give you 5 quarters for $1.
Yeah.
That we've been operating under greater than $1 trillion deficits for the past 8 years. The deficit, the national debt, is almost exactly twice what it was when Obama took office, and Bush had basically done the same thing. I mean, each of the last 2 presidents has, for all practical purposes, doubled the national debt. And my point is not that it's not a political thing. It's not like Republicans do this or Democrats do it. But collectively, we've sort of taken this attitude that somehow we're going to get by with borrowing money to have what we want now. So that basically we're generations of people who are doing whatever we're doing, whatever the money the government is spending right now, or our children and our grandchildren are being expected to make up. So I think that lack of a plan for fiscal sustainability has allowed debt to GDP to get to a point where it's probably critical.
So if you don't think that we're headed for a collapse, and you think that many of these reforms have helped us, but we're exceeding that debt to GDP ratio, as you pointed out that Lacey Hunt illustrated, why is that? Why are we still okay if we are at 106, but we've exceeded that 90% debt to GDP ratio?
Well, I don't think that we're okay. I think we're on a path towards a relatively slow death. That unless we come up with fiscal sustainability, something approaching a balanced budget, and not adding $1 trillion worth of debt to the national debt each year, then we're screwed. That we just have to start to reel things in, and that's not compatible with economic growth. That we can't keep the economy growing we just have, we need to, I hate to use the word, but we need something akin to austerity. We need to recognize that we can't keep doing this. And look, the biggest problems that we have, and when I'm talking about the government debt, the national debt in itself isn't as big as the other two big problems that we face, which are the underfundings of Medicare and Social Security. And if you look at Medicare and Social Security, each of these things has a massive trust fund, money that's put into it. But guess what? Each of those trust funds for Social Security and Medicare, 98.5% of the assets of those trust funds consist of money that is already lent to the Treasury Department and been spent. So we've basically spent the trust funds, and that money has to be repaid from future tax receipts, from future general revenues, not from future Medicare or Social Security taxes, but from other places. And that debt itself, if you say, what is the present value of the underfundings of the future obligations of Medicare and Social Security, the answer is, well, nobody's really sure, because where Social Security is relatively predictable, one thing that we certainly don't have a good handle on is what future medical care expenses are going to be. But the best estimate of what the present value of the underfundings of Medicare and Social Security are approximately $70 trillion. So not only do we own $19.3 trillion, or whatever the national debt is today, but we also have about $70 trillion worth of unfunded liabilities for Medicare and Social Security. Now, those things have to be fixed. Social Security can be fixed by increasing the Social Security tax and maybe increasing the age at which you have to retire. So Social Security is something that I think is fixable. I think that Medicare is much harder to fix because it's very difficult to estimate what the future cost of medical care is going to be. It's something that's been running away. Everybody knows that it's been running away. And I think that, frankly, it's a very different kind of solution, because it's not just a financial one. I think that medical care and the solution to medical care is largely scientific and technical. And what I mean by that is, you know, our way of treating medical care is to basically come up with medications. So that if somebody has high cholesterol, you take a statin every day. So our medical care is based not on curing illness, but on sort of alleviating the symptoms through pharmaceuticals. And I don't think that's good science. I think that our science should be geared towards getting rid of disease, so that there's solutions put in place not for just simply alleviating the symptoms of disease, such as high cholesterol or high blood pressure, but getting rid of them entirely. And those are very different things than those are scientific things. Those are not things that have fiscal solutions. But we need science to be, we need medical science to be geared more towards eliminating disease rather than just simply controlling the symptoms through pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, well, I think some people would probably argue that there's not as much money in curing diseases as there is in treating it. Well,
I don't know. I think that a lot of people would pay to have. I don't see doctors, hospitals, or anybody as interested in maintaining illness. I don't think that doctors are people who want to make money. And what I'm saying is, don't blame pharmaceutical companies. If it's the case that I'm a doctor and I can cure, if you have high cholesterol and I have a permanent solution for it, I'm making a case that nobody's going to keep me from being able to put that into practice. That it's not the case that pharmaceutical companies are going to somehow shoot me because I have a solution for this. No, I think that nobody really wants people to be sick. It's just that our present way of dealing with sickness is to come up with pharmaceutical solutions for it, and then just sort of blame pharmaceutical companies. What we should be doing is coming up with eliminations and cures for disease not drugs that just treat the symptoms of them or enable us to sort of live with them.
Yeah.
And again, these are idealistic, and it's not like, believe me, there are plenty of people, and I know a lot of them right here in the Bay Area who are working on these things. So this isn't something that's just an idea that I have. This is something that people are working on. But nobody knows how long it's going to take, and nobody knows when this is going to happen. So my point really was, and again, I was talking about Social Security and Medicare, where Social Security has a numeric fix that you can put into place. Medicare is a lot tougher because it's just hard to understand how we're going to get the cost of medical care down.
Yeah, well,
and again, as I'm saying, the solution is largely, in my perspective, scientific, not an economic one.
I definitely agree that if we can figure out how to lower the actual cost to treat and cure people of their diseases, and will lower healthcare expenses. But again, for me, my issue with welfare and Medicare and all of these things is the fundamental redistribution of wealth process. For me, I just think that these things themselves, in many cases, Medicare itself, I think is a bubble, and it will probably continue to grow and run away from them. I'm curious. I'd like to list off a few other places and just see if you think that there are bubbles in these markets. Do you think that right now we have a stock market bubble?
Yes.
Okay. What about in the housing market?
The housing market is different in the sense of overall, meaning nationwide. If we have a bubble, it's relatively small, but there are certainly places where we have bubbles. So the thing with housing bubbles is they tend to be localized. And are there places where we're having housing bubbles? Yeah, we may be having a housing bubble right here in the Bay Area where I live, for example. So I think that I don't think that the housing bubbles that we're having are going to be anywhere near on the scale of what happened in 2008. And when I say anywhere near, I mean the total damage won't even be 1/10 of what it was.
So what about the student loan market? Is that? I think that's a bubble, right?
Well, I think it's a. I don't know if I'd even call it a bubble. I think it's just a disaster. It's something other than a bubble. It's an indescribable disaster, and I think that the problem has been it's constantly increased the cost of education. Look, I went to school. Look, I graduated from college in 1966. When I went to college, I had a scholarship. I think that the tuition at Notre Dame was, I honestly, again, it was so long ago. It was either tuition, room, and board was either $2,500 for a semester or for a year. So that and I had a scholarship, so that the total amount of money that my parents spent, or that I spent over 4 years for tuition, room, and board at college was a total of $4,000.
Wow, that's
which is I think half of what I spent to send my son to private school in San Francisco, grade school, for 1 year.
What year was this?
So when I graduated, it was 1966.
Oh, okay. So I mean that we've seen some inflation obviously since then. So one.
Well,
more...
but if you take a look at inflation, nothing is inflated anywhere near to this. Two things have inflated way more than anything else: the cost of college education and medical care.
Oh, absolutely.
If you look at anything else, nothing else is inflated even remotely close to college education. So student loans have had the effect of greatly increasing the cost of college education.
Completely agree.
Once you increase the demand without increasing the supply, generally speaking, you increase the price, and that's what's happened.
Mm-hmm.
People are paying for college. What do we have? We have a bubble. We have a bubble in the cost of tuition.
Mm-hmm. And it allows these schools to basically charge more because they know the government's going to pick up the slack there and in the student loan debt and things like that. So with the next thing, I'm just curious if you would consider this a bubble. Would you think that Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, would you consider that itself a bubble?
Well, that's something different. I don't know what you mean when you say it's a bubble. A bubble to me is an inflation in the value of some sort of asset. if you want to call it a bubble in the sense of it's sort of a, it's a cost that, again, medical care, whether individuals are paying for it, the government is paying for it, has just gotten out of hand. So I think that we need to reel in the cost of medical care, whether it's Obamacare or any other sort of medical care. So Obamacare has increased the price of medical care for the same reason that I was just talking about with with college, that once you increase the demand for a product without increasing the supply, you wind up increasing the cost. So in a sense, if you will, from my perspective, the fatal flaw of Obamacare was it doesn't make sense to increase the demand for a product without doing something to increase the supply. So Obamacare would have been much less expensive and much less harmful to the economy if it had done something to say, you know what, we need to do something to get more doctors and nurses and RN and LVNs out there. So if it increased the supply of medical care while increasing the demand, it would have presumably had the effect of not increasing the price so much.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you as far as that. I got one last question for you, Dick. As far as your view of economics, there's the two schools of thought, the Keynesian economics and the Austrian economics. Which one do you typically lean toward?
I don't think, here's my belief. I think that one thing that we need to recognize when we listen to what economists say and talk about these schools is that it's more or less the case that everybody is clueless. And I don't mean that to be glib. I mean, the fact is that the economy is so complex because it involves decisions made by millions and billions of people every day that we can't possibly forecast things. In other words, the sheer complexity of it makes the idea that we can put together an economic theory about, how we're going to get along or how we're going to increase GDP, or what are the effects of increasing the minimum wage? The simple fact is this stuff is so complicated that to sort of say, well, there's this school and this school, well, I understand that there's different schools. And in general, I'm somebody whose views are libertarian. I believe in free markets. I believe in the government sort of butting out of things and leaving people up to their own. And so put me in that school in sort of the libertarian school of economics, but as somebody who's always going to recognize that this is something which is way more complex than we make believe it is. So if we don't get economics right, we shouldn't apologize for it because it is extremely, extremely complex. And again, it's dynamic. It changes every day. It involves millions and billions of people, and our ability to get it right just simply isn't even remotely close to being there yet.
Absolutely. And, by the way, you actually made the argument for Austrian economics. It's that it's so complicated. The economy is so complicated that there's no way that an individual or a body of government is going to be able to predict it enough to be effective at central planning, as Keynesian economics dictates. That you basically try to central plan the economy, and you'll never do it as well as these billions of individuals engaging in the free market. So the Austrian school of thought is basically stay out of the way and let people engage in the free market on their own, because we'll never be able to plan it out better than individuals can.
Absolutely.
So, I had a great time talking with you, Dick. This is a lot of fun. Do you have any social media websites? I know you had that weekly newsletter. Do you want to share?
There's a weekly newsletter, and I've been writing this. I think I've written 1,055 of these. And if people are interested in what I have to say, they can go to my website, my personal website, which is called LoanMine, LoanMine.com, like the word loan and the word mine. I came up with that because when I was going to work each day, I would say to my wife, I'm going to the loan mine, which is the standard joke we had. So if you go to LoanMine.com, and you'll see at the top a thing that says Rate Watch Newsletter, you can click on that, and then put your email address in and get this thing every week.
Awesome. That's great. Yeah, I'm on the website right now. Guys, check them out, loanmine.com. That's Dick Lapre. I really, really appreciated you coming on. Would you be willing to come back on someday if I have to pick your brain about something that's going on in the economy? I'd love that.
Anytime, Mac.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Dick. You were awesome, and again, you're welcome back anytime.
Hey, thanks. And thank you for having me.
No problem at all. Take care. All right, folks, we're going to go ahead and cut to a commercial break. When we come back, I'm going to dive into the featured topics. Let's go ahead and refresh and just talk about what these topics are going to be. I want to talk about Trump backing off his campaign pledge to further investigate Clinton. I want to play audio from a Central Texan who challenged the right to film and stop and ID laws. Then I also want to give, if we have time, some insights into human nature and talk about identity politics and nationalism. So you guys don't want to go anywhere. We still have a lot left on the agenda. We'll be right back after this break.
Have you visited the On the Move with Mack Worley store? We've got amazing original design t-shirts, hoodies, cell phone cases, and coffee mugs for sale at OnTheMoveShow.com. Just click the shop link on our homepage. You won't want to miss out on the iHeart Open Carry and Bear Arms t-shirts for only $20 plus shipping. Again, just go to OnTheMoveShow.com and click the shop link on our homepage. Your purchases will help make the On the Move show bigger and better. We appreciate your support. Are you an activist who needs affordable flyers or brochures for passing out literature? Or a political candidate who's looking for business cards, logo designs, yard signs, or vehicle decals? Email me, Latasha Worley, for all your graphic design needs at latashaworley@gmail.com. That's LATOSHA Worley@gmail.com. And don't forget to mention On the Move to get a 10% discount on all graphic design services.
Oath Keepers is a nonpartisan association of current active duty military, reserve, guard, veterans, peace officers, and firefighters who will fulfill the oath we swore, with the support of like-minded citizens who take an oath to stand with us to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. So help us God. Join us at oathkeepers.org.
Broadcasting from deep within the heartland of free America, where liberty still shines bright. You're listening to On the Move with Mack Worley III.
And we're back. We're well within the third hour of the program. This is the overdrive hour. This is what we get to the things that we didn't have an opportunity to get to. I want to read off some messages we got on Twitter here. First and foremost, Groundswell Liberty at Groundswell Liberty USA on Twitter. He tweeted us at On the Move Show. Can we impose our copyright on China, violating their sovereignty, if we do not give them the same protection? He's referring to the TPP and how it has copyright and patent protections. So, look, I completely agree. If we're going to hold them to some copyright laws here, we have to withhold or hold ourselves to theirs as well. My issue with the TPP is not the copyright protections. We have a right to enter into an agreement with them, and they have a right to enter into an agreement with us, and that's all fine and good. But the TPP has more stuff in it. So let's say we made a deal that it was awesome, and let's say you were selling me a car, all right, and you're practically giving this car away for free, or let's say it was like an awesome deal. Let's say the car is worth $5,000. I'm just going to put it out there, and we're only charging me $1,000. Well, that's an excellent part of that deal. But if you also said in the deal that I had to pay you, $1,000 a week, that provision of the deal is bad. So that would make the deal bad. So, just because one part of the deal is great, that doesn't mean that all the parts of the deal are great. So, look, I think it's fine for us to enter into agreements with China about copyrights, and I think that that's something that should be done. We should have an agreement on that. But I don't think that should come at the cost of creating international bureaucracies that have the potential to supersede our Constitution and aren't elected by our people, and we have very limited control over what they can do and who serves on these bureaucracies. So that's why I oppose the TPP. And look, I'm not saying that every single part of the TPP is bad, but that one is, and we can do better. That's all I'm saying. We can do better. We don't have to just settle for crappy deals that violate our sovereignty in the process. We can work out other deals. China has an incentive as well to make sure that we're not violating their copyrights, just like we have an incentive as well to make sure that they're not. So we can come together on that issue. It shouldn't be a problem. But what we need to avoid is sliding in all this pork and other crap into the deal that violates our sovereignty, or essentially, violates natural rights of us and other nations as well. I don't want to violate their rights. I don't want to violate their sovereignty. They have national sovereignty just like we do, and I respect their sovereignty. And I don't want them to violate ours. So I hope that answers your question, Peter. Anyway, so let's move on to some of our other featured topics. Let's go right into Trump backing off of his promise his pledge to further investigate Hillary Clinton. Now, this is an article on the Washington the Washington Times. So I will just, caveat that. But let's see what they said. The article is titled "Trump backs off campaign pledge to further investigate Clinton." The article was written by S.A. Miller, dated November 22nd, 2016. President-elect Donald Trump and his transition team signaled Tuesday that his administration will not pursue further investigations of Hillary Clinton, backing off a vow on the campaign trail to appoint a special counsel to probe his Democrat rival's secret email setup as a Secretary of State and suspected pay-to-play deals involving her family's foundation. Mr. Trump labeled Mrs. Clinton crooked Hillary and made charges that she was a corrupt scofflaw. I'm not sure what scofflaw means. You know what? I'm actually going to look that up since we're here. Let's go to dictionary.com. I've never heard of that word before. Let's see what it means. Scofflaw. Let's see.
Scofflaw.
A person who flouts the law, especially one who fails to pay fines owed. A person who flouts rules, conventions, or accepted practices. Great. Learn something new every day on this show, folks. All right, so back to the article. Was a corrupt scofflaw a cornerstone of his campaign? The boisterous crowds at his rallies convinced Mrs. Clinton belonged in prison regularly broke out into "lock her up" chants. So, but by the way, I heard a interesting parody on this. I think it was on Fox News. They had a Donald Trump impersonator that was he was basically joking. He was saying that no, my crowds weren't yelling "lock her up." They were saying "walk her up" because she's elderly and she had trouble getting upstairs, and they wanted people to walk her up the stairs. I just thought that was funny, but I digress. Back to the article. The president-elect struck a very different tone Tuesday, arguing that Mrs. Clinton had suffered enough and the country needed to heal. He went on to say, "I don't want to hurt the Clintons. I really don't," Mr. Trump said in an interview with the New York Times. "She went through a lot and suffered greatly in many different ways," he said. The Clinton Foundation has done, quote, "good work," unquote. In another about-face from his campaign rhetoric, Mr. Trump told the newspaper that he would keep an open mind on the issue of climate change and the role human activity plays in rising global temperatures. So that's another flip, as well as the ACA provisions, the Obamacare provisions that he's talking about, keeping your children on your policy until age 26, and the exemption for pre-existing conditions, and then also obviously the Clinton flop here. So I would love to hear from you. Give us a call, 360-450-5625. Again, 360-450-5625. Let me know what you think. If you're a Donald Trump supporter, do you support these flips, or do you think that these aren't flips at all, and there's some nuances to be had here? I'm interested to hear what you have to say. You can also get us on Twitter at OnTheMoveShow, whether or not the show is live or not. I'll read your tweets on the next show if we miss you and you catch us on the archive or something. And you can also message us, facebook.com/OnTheMoveShow. By the way, for those of you out there, I also shared loanmind.com, Dick LaPree's website. feel free to check it out and subscribe to his new newsletter. You can go to the Rate Watch newsletter link on there to subscribe. So please feel free to do that. Show him some love. And okay, so regarding this Clinton flip, deciding not to do this, some people are saying that, oh, look, it's a scam basically, or not necessarily a scam. It's a trick. He's trying to trick Obama so that Obama doesn't feel the need to give her some kind of pardon. Although, it's interesting, if you would give someone a pardon, that would kind of imply that they were guilty in the first place. And when Clinton would accept that pardon, would that be an admission of guilt? That's an interesting question to ask. I don't know. I turn that over to you. But my concern here is, first of all, Donald Trump has made a lot of promises, and considering the rhetoric that was said on the campaign trail, I think if I were a Donald Trump supporter, like I've spoken to many out there, potentially many of you out there, I don't know where you all stand, but if you support Donald Trump, I would imagine that you would be feeling a little betrayal right now. I mean, he hasn't even so much as gotten into office, and he's already gone back on the wall, saying that parts of it won't be a wall, they'll be fences, potentially. And I argue that that's not even... He probably won't even do that. That's my contention, but hey, we'll see. He's also flipped on the ACA. He's flipped on Clinton, and now he's potentially talking about flipping on climate change. These were big issues that he was running on. I would imagine that this would very much upset his voters, and I have heard a lot of rhetoric coming from his voters, from some of the supporters, that saying that Donald Trump, people will go after him if he doesn't actually follow through on these promises. And I don't know if that go after implies the use of force or something along those lines, or if they're talking about politically go after him. I don't know. Although I can see elements inside the alt-right, if Donald Trump is what I believe he is, again, a progressive, I think that he's not really going to do a whole lot to actively piss off the left. I think he's going to do a lot of stuff that they're going to like. That's my opinion, because I think he's a Democrat. He's been a Democrat most of his life. He's been a progressive most of his life. I don't think he has the ideology, but at its core, he falls back on these progressive issues. Again, I think he believes that government is the answer. I believe that if you were to put him in a school of thought of economics, he would fall within the Keynesian economics that thinks that the government can plan everything. And it's not that this is Donald Trump's philosophy. He said basically, with the exception of this part, I'm going to add this in. He didn't say that it was the government's fault, that it was just stupid people in the government. So it's not the government shouldn't be doing these things. It's that we just have stupid people running the government, and that's why we're having problems. As opposed to the government shouldn't be doing what it's doing, and we should leave things to the free market instead of letting the government put stinking meat hooks in everything. But I digress. So I can see from two different perspectives here on the Hillary Clinton issue. Now, I can understand, first of all, Donald Trump appointing a special counsel. This is a promise he made, so I can understand people being angry at him for doing that. But at the same time, I do think Donald Trump is doing some things to try to extend olive branches out to the left. And now, being that we are extremely divided, I can see a reason for not actively going after Hillary Clinton as an essential olive branch to them, and trying to not make people think that he's going after political enemies, people who ran against him. And again, I can see the benefit of both. Honestly, though, when it comes down to it, I believe that Hillary Clinton should be investigated, and I think she has been investigated. And I just don't believe the FBI and their idea that even though she's done all of these things and she violated, she violated a lot of I don't really know if I want to say laws, but I guess, I mean, really, when you're talking about classified material on a private email, so yes, she violated the law. So even though she was extremely careless, Director Comey said that he didn't think that a prosecutor would prosecute her because she didn't have the intent. She didn't have the intent to violate the law. I don't think that same logic applies to us. If I if I was drinking a lot of alcohol and I went to bed and I woke up still drunk and didn't realize it, and I went out and did some drunk driving, I guess is how you'd say that, and I was involved in an accident, I may not have intended to go cause that accident because I was drinking. That may not have been my intention, but yet I'll still go to jail. Just like if I robbed a bank and I was only intending to take my money out of the bank, that was only my intention, but I accidentally got other people's money. I still violated the law. I think, the law is pretty clear in this, and if you have classified material and you're sending and receiving classified material, as we know Hillary Clinton did, and she had, secret, she had top secret, she had that special access information on her server. I do believe that rule of law is important. So I don't necessarily think that Donald Trump should be the one spearheading it. I don't think it should look like Donald Trump is the one that's pushing this agenda. But I do think that we should uphold the law, and I don't believe that there is anything or anyone that should be too big to jail. I think that our politicians are public servants, and they should be held to the highest standard. And especially, people who are in these extremely high offices with such power and influence and ability to do pay-to-play deals like Hillary Clinton was when she was working at the State Department. I think we should be really careful about giving exemptions from laws to our politicians, because I don't think that will bode well for us in the future. But I'd love to hear from you. Again, the number is 360-450-5625. Get us on @OnTheMoveShow on Twitter. And let's move on to the next featured topic. So I want to play now a Central Texan who is challenging the right to film and stop and ID laws. And this is particularly interesting. So I'll just go ahead and go right into the clip. Here it goes.
An arrest by Galveston police is raising questions tonight. The defendant describes himself as a video activist.
Yeah, officers picked him up after he recorded them. Now there are questions being raised about who crossed the line in this. Was it the photographer or the police? Doug Miller in Galveston looking for answers.
Do you have a state-issued driver's license? I don't want to answer your questions.
What you're seeing here is admittedly amateur video. That's part of the point. Galveston police officers questioned a young man standing on a public sidewalk shooting video of a police station.
Let me get your name.
Like I said, I'm sorry.
So you're not going to identify yourself?
I'm showing you that I didn't do it.
You're not going to identify yourself?
No.
Okay, go ahead and put your hands behind your back.
I was filming, taking pictures out in public.
Philip Turner bought a camera on eBay and started traveling around Texas shooting videos of police stations just to prove something.
Photography is not a crime. And everyone can do it, and there's nothing wrong with it. As long as you're in a public place and in a public setting, out in the open filming, there's nothing wrong with that.
Turner was arrested after he refused to identify himself to police, says he didn't have to. And our legal analyst says he's right. The Texas Penal Code says, quote, a person commits an offense if he intentionally refuses to give his name, residence address, or date of birth to a peace officer who has lawfully arrested the person and requested the information. Notice the law says nothing about giving your name before you're arrested.
So this is a problem. This is a huge issue when police start enforcing their feelings instead of the law. When they start deciding that they just don't like the kind of behavior that you're engaged in, and even though there is no law about it, they either think there is a law about it or think they have the authority to force you to stop doing something that you have every right to do. Now, look, as the gentleman said, the person who was arrested, he said photography is not a crime. It's absolutely correct. Photography is not a crime, especially if you're standing on public property. You have every right to record. There is no expectation of privacy in public. This is the Supreme Court that determined that. This is the Supreme Court that's already ruled on this. So you have every right to record. Secondly, you have every right to record public officials in the performance of public duties. So engaging with the citizen who they're out there talking to, they have every right to record them. You have every right to stand on a sidewalk and record a traffic stop. You have every right to do that. So the issue here is the police come out and they demand his identification, but let's point out, you only have to provide identification if the police have reasonable suspicion or probable cause that you've committed a crime. If they have no reasonable suspicion or probable cause, then they cannot lawfully detain you or demand your identification. So that's kind of the point. And in this Texas Penal Code, 38.02, the one that says that a person commits an offense if he intentionally refuses to give his name, residence address, or date of birth to a peace officer who has lawfully arrested the person and requested the information. So you're already under arrest. So that means that they've had to have probable cause, reasonable suspicion to arrest you in the first place. If without that, that would have been an unlawful arrest. And, I suppose you could challenge the arrest in court, and you could subsequently challenge the additional charge of not providing the requested information. But again, the point is that these officers came out and demanded identification from somebody who was not in violation of the law. They had no probable cause. They had no reasonable suspicion that this individual was engaging in unlawful activity. So, because it's completely lawful to, again, as the Supreme Court said, to record while you're in public. There's no expectation of privacy in public. So you can record public buildings as well. You can record a police station. It's public property, unless for some reason it's private somehow, some way. So, again, but you can still record that private property, even if you're. You can still record that private property if you're on public property. If it's visible from the public, then you can record it. So, anyway, this was a unjust arrest, and thankfully, we have an update about this that just came out the other day. Let's go ahead and play that clip.
Hi, this message is for Philip Andrew Turner. My name is Gladys Lopez. I'm with the Municipal Court in Galveston. I'm calling to let you know that you are no longer required to appear in court for the charge of failure to identify. This charge in docket number 001494606 has been dismissed. If you have any questions, please give me a call back at 409-765-3748. Thank you.
So they dismissed it. And it's interesting. His only charge, it sounds like, was failure to identify. So how can you have a failure to identify if there's no other charges? Because the other charges would have been what would have been necessary for him to be arrested in the first place, which is the prerequisite of him having to identify himself. So, again, good on this activist for standing up. Good on him for opposing this and standing up for what he believes in. Photography is not a crime, and it is important to hold our public officials accountable. I don't think this guy's a troublemaker. I don't think that he did anything wrong whatsoever, and I hope he continues to do this. And in fact, I fully plan on doing more of this kind of stuff. When I got arrested, by the way, for those of you who don't know, I got arrested for open carry, unlawfully arrested. I ended up winning an appeal. One of the things I noticed is that you do put in this kind of activism with open carry. It's essential, and people should continue to do it. I'm not talking about it negatively in any way, but you do put yourself in a bit of a risk when your purpose is activism for open carry, because if you do get arrested unlawfully, you're now fighting, in many cases, tougher charges. So, in my case, I was lucky because it's funny to call myself lucky in that situation because all my charges were still misdemeanors. I had a gross misdemeanor that was displaying a weapon in a manner under circumstances and in a time and place that violates, that warrants alarm for the safety of others. I got that memorized there. It's RCW 9.41.270. Feel free to look it up. But that was considered a gross misdemeanor. That's what I beat after I was initially wrongfully convicted and then I won an appeal. But this kind of activism, just out there with the camera, there is very little risk to you as far as losing your gun rights and whatnot. At most, you're talking about a misdemeanor charge as long as you're not resisting or anything like that. So, in my opinion, I'm not going to give my identification. And you guys do whatever you want. This isn't legal advice. I'm not qualified to give you legal advice. But in my opinion, I'm not going to provide my identification if I'm, first of all, not being detained. So if an officer, in many cases, they will not tell you if you're being detained or not. You ask them, am I being detained? 9 times out of 10, they're just not going to answer you, or sometimes they maybe say yes, and then you've got them on film saying that they've detained you, and if that you can prove later in court that they didn't have reasonable suspicion or probable cause to detain you, then you've got a winning case on your hand, and potentially a lawsuit after the fact. But in cases like this, you're at less risk of losing your right to bear arms than, for instance, open carry. Who knows what could happen in open carry? And obviously, open carry also, it's more of a high stress situation for all parties involved, and that again potentially has the potential for you to be killed unlawfully, unjustly by a police officer who is just freaking out and doesn't know how to handle the situation, which is not on the open carrier. That is on the police department's lack of training and the lack of information that these officers have about the law. So, again, more power to this activist. Way to go. Very happy for them. And anyway, at this point, we're going to go ahead and cut to a commercial break. When we come back, I want to look at some insights in human nature that I've been thinking about throughout the past month or two, really, for quite a while, honestly. But I want to just briefly mention this, and then we'll end the show. I really do appreciate you all sticking with us through the break. We'll be right back after these messages. Don't go anywhere.
Have you visited the On the Move with Mack Worley store? We've got amazing original design t-shirts, hoodies, cell phone cases, and coffee mugs for sale at OnTheMoveShow.com. Just click the shop link on our homepage. You won't want to miss out on the iHeart Open Carry and Bear Arms t-shirts for only $20 plus shipping. Again, just go to OnTheMoveShow.com and click the shop link on our homepage. Your purchases will help make the On the Move show bigger and better. We appreciate your support. Are you an activist who needs affordable flyers or brochures for passing out literature? Or a political candidate who's looking for business cards, logo designs, yard signs, or vehicle decals? Email me, Latasha Worley, for all your graphic design needs at latashaworley@gmail.com. That's LATOSHA Worley@gmail.com. And don't forget to mention On the Move to get a 10% discount on all graphic design services.
I do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, and that I take this obligation freely, without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, pledging my life, my fortune, and my sacred honor. So help me God. Join us at oathkeepers.org.
Broadcasting from deep within the heartland of free America, where liberty still shines bright. You're listening to On the Move with Mack Worley III.
Hello, we're back, and we only got about 13 minutes left in the show. So before we move into our feature topic, Insights into Human Nature, let me just talk about some of the comments that we got in our chat room on Spreaker. Joseph said that he didn't mind taking off the 26, requirement that insurers will have to keep children on the policy of parents up until age 26. He said that they should get their own insurance at 18. And he did disagree with me on the pre-existing condition aspect of it. He said he might as well give up his entire paycheck if that was gone. Well, look, I understand some people, it's going to increase the cost. People will end up, some people who have pre-existing conditions will have to pay more to be insured because of their associated costs with that. So my question for those of you out there who'd be in the position of paying more is it immoral to hurt other people and to take their stuff? And if you follow that position, if you say yes, it's immoral, then let me ask you, is it moral for you to force people to pay for your health care? Is that moral? Do people have a right to, or do you have, as an individual, do you have a right to other people's money in order to pay for your medical expenses? I would argue, if you're following the non-aggression principle consistently, that if you think that it's moral to have other people subsidize your health care costs, I would disagree, and I would think that it violates the non-aggression principle. Moreover, I would consider that a form of slavery, to force people to use force against them in order to get something out of them, to get a service or wealth, is slavery. And personally, I cannot support slavery. I can't, whether or not it's economic slavery or physical slavery. I cannot get behind that. So I understand some people are going to have to pay more, but I think those people that are having to pay more are people that are going to get more bang out of whatever they're paying for. They're going to be paying more for a service that they're using and having more expenses from that service. So though I understand where you're coming from, Joseph, I just don't think it's morally right to force others to subsidize people's health care. That's just my opinion. But I digress. So let's move on here. I've been thinking a lot about human nature. And in terms of government as well, I've been thinking about, is human nature at its essence to be free, or is it human nature to look for some kind of leader to make us feel safe and to solve our problems so that we don't have to think about them? And, after really thinking about this and noodling this out, I think that a lot of people want to feel safe. A lot of people want people to do the work for them. I think it feels easier. And I think that's why the liberty movement has a disadvantage in some ways, because we have to explain to people why, first of all, having someone else with the ultimate authority over you and having all this power is dangerous to your liberty itself, to your liberty. And it may actually make you less safe. But in addition to that, it actually makes you less free. If someone has the ability to use force against you, or your enemies, or people that you are afraid of for one reason or another, then they also have that ability to use it against you. And just because your guy's in office today doesn't necessarily mean that'll be the case tomorrow, as evidenced by this election. We see the Obama supporters who are very shocked. They're feeling this sense of disillusion about the electoral system, especially the Electoral College, but also about now they're fearing for the future because they don't know what Trump and his administration will do. So, look, I think that we in many ways here in this nation have overcome this human nature, and that's why I think that we are the exception to the rule when it comes to governments. We have created a charter of rights. We have said that the government cannot violate these rights, and that has allowed free minds, free markets. I mean, mostly free. I mean, we still have a lot of government intervention in the markets, but for the most part, we are the freest nation in the world. And I think as a result, we have, in creating a system of government based on checks and balances to limit the power of each individual branch, I think it has done a lot of combating against human nature. Maybe I'm wrong. I would love to hear what you guys have to say about it. Do you think that human nature is to look for a leader to solve your problems? Is human nature to be in bonds of slavery, or is human nature to be free? I think that as we enlighten ourselves, I think people begin to move away from the human nature, resist that human nature, to have a strong man, have a big government solution, have a government control every aspect of your life. And as we become more and more enlightened, we resist that. Just like in the same way, I think it's human nature for us to get angry and hate and want to use violence against people. I think that's human nature. But as we become more enlightened, we learn to resist that urge, and we can learn to do things that take abstract intellect, like the concept of forgiveness. Forgiveness takes a hell of a lot of intellect. To forgive somebody that has wronged you in some way, to love your enemy, I mean, that's a concept that only humans are capable of doing. So now let's move on from human nature into identity politics and nationalism. One of the things, the byproducts of these last 8 years under Obama has been a division in identity politics, and again, partly some of this is to blame from demographic polls and things like that, where we start breaking people up into scientific polling categories to determine what's going to be more beneficial, with what group and things like that. So. That has been partly to blame for identity politics, but also the politicians, catering to these identity groups, saying that, look, you vote for me, I'm going to give you something. I'm going to take it from this group, the fat cat bankers or whoever the enemy is that they're demonizing today, and I'm going to give it to you. We're going to make sure that people are paying their fair share, and if they are, again, that's a talking point that they don't really specify. What is fair share? It depends on what progressive socialist you're talking to today. But the idea that they're going to basically buy off these identity politic groups and they cater to them is what has led us to this corresponding path. I mean, they're parallel paths. As one thing gets more speed, begins to snowball. As identity politics grows, the sentiment for nationalism grows, because you start to, as in America right now, every single group but white males has a identity politics group that is catered to, and these politicians will make promises for and bend over backwards to impress and to get their vote, except for white males. Every other group is catered to in this way. And in fact, you're actually, as a white male, you're told you have white privilege, and that basically every opinion that you have doesn't really matter, because the only answer is you have a white privilege and you don't understand, and everything's different for you because you have all of this systemic white privilege. And that leads to resentment. And that resentment can coalesce in the form of nationalism, where people identify with people within their geographic locations, and the way their race or the way they look, or a litany of other categories, but it leads to nationalism. And I contend that the Democrats are to blame in many ways. They're not solely responsible. We each have played our own part in this, but the Democrats and their identity politics game has resulted in a rise of nationalism. And this is not unique just here in America. We've seen the same thing from the rise of nationalism, nationalist fronts in Europe and all across the globe. So I think this is going to continue as we continue to use identity politics to bribe people and to advocate for individual groups. I think the solution here is the unifying message of liberty, is to talk about, instead of how the government can benefit this specific group, is how we can remove the government's impediments to all of us. That way we can all be more free and happier, and have the ability to forge our own destiny. So that's my thoughts. I would love to hear from you. Again, message me on Twitter at OnTheMoveShow or on Facebook.com/OnTheMoveShow. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Anyway, that's our show for today. I really do appreciate you all tuning in. Mack Pack, you're the tip of the spear, and I really just appreciate you so much for tuning in week after week and giving me your continued support and engaging with me in our chat rooms, on our groups, all that stuff. Thank you so much. And anyway, don't forget to check us out. By the way, we broadcast every Sunday at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. That's 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time at OnTheMoveShow.com. Check our website out. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that we have a store on there, a shop. Please feel free to click the shop link. We got original design t-shirts, hoodies, phone cases, coffee mugs. We got all sorts of original designs in there, like the I Heart Open Carry design, the Be Libertarian shirt, all sorts of different things. Please feel free to check it out, and your purchases will go towards helping our program get bigger. You're going to help us get, new equipment and things like that. Pay for, hosting fees and things like that. So it would be really appreciated if you would check that out and make some purchases. Also, don't forget to follow us on Spreaker.com/OnTheMoveShow. The more followers that we have on there, the more people will find us in search engines and things like that. So you'd be helping spread the message of liberty. You can also check out the show over there as well. You can listen to it over there. Big shout out to the 405media.com and youthrevolt.org. Thank you so much for simulcasting our show over there. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter @OnTheMoveShow and like us on Facebook.com/OnTheMoveShow. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel at YouTube.com/OnTheMoveShow. And as always, know your rights, assert your rights, and get on the move.